Berkshire today trades around $69,100 a share. I think I'm going to go out and buy about 100 shares. Over time, the company's annualized performance is more than double that of S&P 500, and Berkshire today is worth more than $100 billion. But Mr. Buffett is known as much for his unpretentious style as for his lofty success. He has become a champion of investors and is legendary for his aversion to corporate doublespeak. He is rare among CEOs in that he cheerfully admits his mistakes. 3 years ago, he wrote in his annual report that Berkshire would have done better if he'd simply had gone to the movies. There weren't very many years like that since 1965, believe me. Berkshire was proudly, even defiantly absent from the dot-com hysteria of the last few years. And now that the bubble has burst, as we all know, it's Warren Buffett who's having the last laugh. In his most recent letter to shareholders, he wrote, quote, "We have embraced the 21st century by entering such cutting-edge industries as brick, carpet, insulation, and paint. Try to control your excitement," unquote. You know, and personally, from reading his letters, I mean, it's just a joy. It's a business lesson in itself. I would encourage you, whenever you get an opportunity, to take one aside and read it carefully. You'll learn a tremendous amount. His wisdom and insights are so valued that some investors buy a share of Berkshire stock just so they can hear him at his legendary annual meeting, or as he calls it, Woodstock for Capitalists. He doesn't make speaking appearances often, and we are extremely fortunate to have him with us today. Earl Leonard of Coca-Cola and our distinguished executive in residence had a lot to do with that, Earl, and we're deeply indebted to you for helping to arrange this. Thank you very much. Our format today will be primarily questions and answers. Mr. Buffett will make some brief remarks at the beginning, and then we'll move into your phase. We will have a microphone set up over here. We would like you to come around. We're videotaping, so we'd like you to use the microphone, please. So go ahead and begin to line up over there to ask your questions. So would you please give a very warm welcome to the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett.
Your mic, so you can go anywhere you want. Okay. Yeah, right. Thank you. Testing. 1 million, 2 million. Okay. I came in from Nebraska today, and you're probably all familiar with us, mainly by our football team. We have those fellows with the big white helmets with those red ends on them. I asked one of our starters the other day, what's the N stand for? And he said, knowledge. We make it tough on them, though. I mean, you don't coast through Nebraska just because you're a football player. They major in agricultural economics. And there's a two-question final for all of the players. And first question is, what did Old MacDonald have? And they were giving that to one of our potential Heisman Trophy winners the other day, and he started to sweat. Finally, he brightened up. He said, farm. Professor, delighted, of course. You don't want to flunk a Heisman candidate. So he said, you're halfway home. He said, just one more question. He said, how do you spell farm? Now the guy really starts to sweat. He looks at the ceiling and he looks around. Finally, his face brightens up and he says, E-I-E-I-O. So watch for that guy this year. He'll be dynamite. I really want to talk about what's on your mind, so we're going to do a Q&A in a minute. There are a couple questions I always get asked. People always say, well, who should I go to work for when I get out? And I've got a very simple answer. We may elaborate more on this as we go along, but the real thing to do is to get going and for some institution or individual that you admire. I mean, it's crazy to take in between jobs just because they look good on your resume or because you get a little higher starting pay. I was up at Harvard a while back, and a very nice young guy picked me up at the airport, Harvard Business School attendee, and he said, I went to undergrad here, and then I worked for X and Y and Z, and now I've come here, And he said, I thought it would really round out my resume perfectly if I went to work now for a big management consulting firm. And I said, well, is that what you want to do? And he said, no, but he said, that's the perfect resume. And I said, well, when are you going to start doing what you like? And he said, well, I'll get to that someday. And I said, well, I said, your plan sounds to me a lot like saving up sex for your old age. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I told that same group, I said, go to work for whomever you admire the most. And I said, you can't get a bad result. You'll jump out of bed in the morning and you'll be having fun. And the dean called me up a couple of weeks later. He said, what'd you tell those kids? He said, they're all becoming self-employed. So you've got to temper that advice a little bit. Play one game a little bit with me for just a minute, and then we'll get to your questions. I'd like for the moment to have you, have you pretend I've made you a great offer, and I've told you that you could pick any one of your classmates, and you now know each other probably pretty well after being here for a while. You'd have 24 hours to think it over, and you can pick any one of your classmates, and you get 10% of their earnings for the rest of their lives. And I ask you what goes through your mind in determining which one of those you would pick. You can't pick the one with the richest father. That doesn't count. I mean, you've got to do this on merit. But you probably wouldn't pick the person that gets the highest grades in the class. I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting the highest grades in the class, but that isn't going to be the quality that sets apart a big winner from the rest of the pack. Think about who you would pick and why. And I think you'll find when you get through, you'll pick some individual. You've all got the ability. You wouldn't be here otherwise. And you've all got the energy. I mean, you've got, the initiative is here. The intelligence is here throughout the class. But some of you are going to be bigger winners than others. And it gets down to a bunch of qualities that, interestingly enough, are self-made. I mean, it's not how tall you are. It's not whether you can kick a football 60 yards. It's not whether you can run the 100-yard dash in 10 seconds. It's not whether you're the best-looking person in the room. It's a whole bunch of qualities that really come out of Ben Franklin or the Boy Scout code or whatever it may be. I mean, it's integrity, it's honesty, it's generosity, it's being willing to do more than your share. It's just all those qualities that are self-selected. And then if you look on the other side of the ledger, because there's always a catch to these, free gifts and genie jokes. So you also have to, and this is the fun part, you also have to sell short one of your classmates and pay 10% of what they do. So who do you think is going to do the worst in the class? This is way more fun. And think about it again. And again, it isn't the person with the lowest grades or anything of the sort. It's the person who just doesn't shape up in the character department. I mean, we look for three things when we hire people. We look for intelligence, we look for initiative or energy, and we look for integrity. And if they don't have the latter, the first two will kill you. Because if you're going to get somebody without integrity, you want them lazy and dumb. I mean, you don't want them smart and energetic. So it's that third quality, but everything about that quality is your choice. You can't change the way you are wired much, but you can change a lot of what you do with that wiring. And it's the habits that you generate now on those qualities, or those negative qualities. I mean, the person who always, claims credit for things they didn't do, that always cuts corners, that you can't count on. I mean, in the end, those are habit patterns. And the time to form the right habits is when you're your age. I mean, it doesn't do me much good to get golf lessons now. If I'd gotten golf lessons when I was your age, I might be a decent golfer. But someone once said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And I see that all the time. I see people with habit patterns that are self-destructive when they're 50 or 60, and they really can't change them. They're imprisoned by that. But you're not imprisoned by anything. So when you write down the qualities of that person that you'd like to buy 10% of, look at that list and ask yourself, is there anything on that list I couldn't do? And the answer is there won't be. And when you look at the person you sell short, and you look at those qualities that you don't like, if you see any of those in yourself, egotism, whatever it may be, selfishness, you can get rid of that. I mean, that is not ordained. And if you follow that, and Ben Franklin did this, and my old boss Ben Graham did this at early ages in their young teens. Ben Graham looked around and he said, who do I admire? And he wanted to be admired himself, and he said, why do I admire these other people? And he said, if I admire them for these reasons, maybe other people will admire me if I behave in a similar manner. And he decided what kind of a person he wanted to be. And if you follow that, at the end, you'll be the person you want to buy 10% of. I mean, that's the goal in the end. And it's something that's achievable by everybody in this room. So that's the end of the sermon. Now let's talk about what's on your mind. And you can ask anything. The only thing I won't tell you is what we're buying or selling or about. I don't even tell myself that. I mean, I write it down, and then it's like the Coca-Cola formula. There's only 2 people can get into the trust department and find out what they are, and I don't know who the 2 are. So we don't talk about what we're buying or selling, but anything else is fair game. Personal, business, anything you'd like to talk about. And actually, the tougher the questions are, the more interesting it is for me. So don't spare my feelings. I mean, just throw at my head. And with that, let's. I guess we've got a microphone. Is this the only microphone, or is there one on?
This is the only microphone.
Okay.
Right here. To ask a question, you'll need to come down to this microphone.
Just stand in line, and I'll be Regis Philbin, and you can.
Yes.
I have an old-fashioned belief that I should expect to make money in things that I understand. And when I say understand, I don't mean understand, what the product does or anything like that. I mean understand what the economics of the business are likely to look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I know, in general, what the economics of, say, Wrigley chewing gum will look like 10 years from now. The internet isn't going to change the way people chew gum. It isn't going to change which gum they chew. If you own the chewing gum market in a big way, and you've got Double Mint and Spearmint and Juicy Fruit, those brands will be there 10 years from now. So I can't pinpoint exactly what the numbers are going to look like on Wrigley, but I'm not going to be way off if I try to look forward on something like that. Evaluating that company is within what I call my circle of competence. I understand what they do, I understand the economics of it, I understand the competitive aspects of the business. There can be all kinds of companies that have wonderful futures, but I don't know which ones they are. I've given talks in the past where I carry with me a 70-page, tightly printed list, and it shows 2,000 auto companies. Now, if at the start of the 20th century, you had seen what the auto was going to do to this country, the impact it would have on the lives of then your children and grandchildren and so on. It transformed the American landscape. But of those 2,000 companies, 3 basically survive. And they haven't done that well many times. So how do you pick 3 winners out of 2,000? I mean, it's not so easy to do. It's easy when you look back, but it's not so easy looking forward. So you could have been dead right on the fact that the auto industry, in fact, you probably couldn't have predicted how big an impact it would have. But you wouldn't have, if you'd bought companies across the board, you wouldn't have made any money, because the economic characteristics of that business were not easy to define. I've always said the easier thing to do is figure out who loses. And what you really should have done in 1905 or so, when you saw what was going to happen with the auto, is you should have gone short horses. There were 20 million horses in 1900, and there's about 4 million horses now. So it's easy to figure out the losers. The loser is the horse. But the winner was the auto overall. But 2,000 companies just about failed. A few merged out and so on. There were 3 companies, auto companies, in the Dow Industrials in the 1920s and 30s. Studebaker, Nash Kelvinator, and Hudson Motor. Now, those names are all familiar to me, and maybe some of them are familiar to you, but they're not making any cars. They didn't make money, and yet at one time, they were in the Dow 30. They were the aristocrats of American business, and they got creamed. So figuring out the economic characteristics of the winners in a wonderful business is not easy. in North Carolina, you know, Orville and Wilbur took off. Well, I guess Orville took off and Wilbur watched. I'd have been Wilbur. But if you could have seen the future of the airline business from that point forward and how that would transform things, you know, it would have blown you away. And it's excited people, incidentally, ever since. But if there had been a capitalist at Kitty Hawk, he should have shot Orville down. I mean, because it's done nothing but cost investors money. There were over 400 airplane companies in the 1920s and 30s alone. There was in Omaha. There was in Nebraska. We were the Silicon Valley, apparently, of aircraft. And they all disappeared. It's been a terrible business. At the end of 1991, if you'd added up the aggregate earnings from all airline companies with billions poured in, since Wilbur and Orville were down there, they came to less than zero. The number of passengers went up every year. You know, the importance of the industry was dramatically increased decade by decade, and nobody made any money. So figuring out the economic consequences, TV, I think there's, 20, 25 million sets a year sold in the United States. I don't think there's one of them made in the United States anymore. I mean, you'd say TV set manufacturer, what a wonderful business. I mean, everybody, nobody had a TV in 1950, or thereabouts, 45 to 50. Everybody has multiple sets now. Nobody in the United States has made any real money making the sets. They're all out of business. You know, the Magnavoxes, the RCAs, all of those companies. Radio was the equivalent of the 20. Over 500 companies making radios in the 1920s. Again, I don't think there's a U.S. radio manufacturer at the present time. But Coca-Cola, what was it, 1884 at Jacobs Pharmacy or whatever, the fellow comes up with something. A lot of copiers over the years. But now you've got a company that is selling roughly 1.1 billion 8-ounce servings of its product, not all Coke, Sprite, and some others, daily throughout the world 117 years later. So understanding the economic characteristics of a business is different than predicting the fact that an industry is going to do wonderfully. And so when I look at the internet businesses, or I look at tech businesses, I say this is a marvelous thing, and I love to play around on the computer, and I order my books from Amazon and all kinds of things, but I don't know who's going to win. And unless I know who's going to win, I'm not interested in investing. I'll just play around on the computer. And defining your circle of competence is the most important aspect of investing. It's not how large your circle is. You don't have to be an expert on everything. But knowing where the perimeter of that circle of what you know and what you don't know is, and staying inside of it, is all important. Tom Watson Sr., who started IBM, said in his book, he said, I'm no genius, he said, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. And, that is the key. So if I understand a few things, and I stick in that arena, I'll do okay. And if I don't understand something, but I get all excited about it because my neighbors are talking about it, stocks are going up and everything, I start fooling around someplace else, eventually I'll get creamed, and I should. So now let's go over here.
Hello, Mr. Buffett. I got two short questions. One is, how do you find intrinsic value in a company?
Well, intrinsic value is the number that if you were all-knowing about the future and could predict all the cash that a business would give you between now and Judgment Day, discounted at the proper discount rate, that number is what the intrinsic value of a business is. In other words, the only reason for making an investment and laying out money now is to get more money later on, right? That's what investing is all about. Now, when you look at a stock, when you look at a bond, so it means the United States government bond, it's very easy to tell how much you're going to get back. It says it right on the bond. It says when you get the interest payments. It says when you get the principal. So it's very easy to figure out the value of a bond. It can change tomorrow if interest rates change. But the cash flows are printed on the bond. The cash flows aren't printed on a stock certificate. That's the job of the analyst, is to print out, change that stock certificate, which represents an interest in the business, and change that into a bond and say, this is what I think it's going to pay out in the future. When we buy, some new machine for Shaw to make carpet, that's what we're thinking about, obviously, and you all learn that in business school. But it's the same thing for a big business. If you buy Coca-Cola today, the company is selling for about $110 to $15 billion in the market. The question is, if you had 110 or 15 billion, you wouldn't be listening to me, but I'd be listening to you incidentally. But the question is, would you lay it out today to get what the Coca-Cola company is going to deliver to you over the next 200 or 300 years? The discount rate doesn't make much difference after as you get further out. And that is a question of how much cash they're going to give you. It isn't a question of, it isn't a question of how many analysts are going to recommend it or what the volume in the stock is or what the chart looks like or anything. It's a question of how much cash it's going to give you. That's the only reason. It's true if you're buying a farm. It's true if you're buying an apartment house. Any financial asset. Oil in the ground, you're laying out cash now to get more cash back later on. And the question is how much are you going to get, when are you going to get it, and how sure are you? And when I calculate intrinsic value of a business, when we buy businesses, and whether we're buying all of a business or a little piece of a business, I always think we're buying the whole business because that's my approach to it. I look at it and say, what will come out of this business and when? And what you really like, of course, is them to be able to use the money they earn and earn higher returns on it as you go along. I mean, Berkshire has never distributed anything to its shareholders, but its ability to distribute goes up as the value of the businesses we own increases. We can compound it internally, but the real question is, Berkshire selling for, we'll say, 105 or so billion now. What can we distribute from that 100? If you're going to buy the whole company for 105 billion now, can we distribute enough cash to you soon enough to make it sensible at present interest rates to lay out that cash now? And that's what it gets down to. And if you can't answer that question, you can't buy the stock. You can gamble in the stock if you want to, or your neighbors can buy it. But if you don't answer that question, and I can't answer that for internet companies, for example. There are a lot of companies, there are all kinds of companies I can't answer it for, but I just stay away from those. Number two.
So you got formulas involved in finding intrinsic values on certain companies. I mean, you've got a mathematical system set up.
Discounted present value of future cash, yeah.
Okay. Second short question is, why haven't you written down your set of formulas or your strategies in written form so you can share it with everyone else?
Well, I think I actually have written about that. If you read the annual reports over the recent years, in fact, the most recent annual report, I use what I've just been talking about. I use the illustration of Aesop. Because here Aesop was in 600 BC. Smart man. Wasn't smart enough to know it was 600 BC, though. I mean, would take a little foresight. But Aesop, in between tortoises and hares and all these other things, he found time to write about, birds. And he said, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Now, that isn't quite complete, because the question is, how sure are you that there are two in the bush? And how long do you have to wait to get them out? Now, he probably knew that, but he just didn't have time because he had all these other proverbs to write and had to get on with it. But he was halfway there in 600 BC. That's all there is to investing, is how many birds are in the bush, when are you going to get them out, and how sure are you? Now, if interest rates are 15%, roughly, you've got to get two birds out of the bush in 5 years to equal the bird in the hand. But if interest rates are 3%, and you can get two birds out in 20 years, it still makes sense to give up the bird in the hand, because it all gets back to discounting against an interest rate. Problem is, often you don't know, not only how many birds are in the bush, but in the case of the internet companies, there weren't any birds in the bush. But they still take the bird that you give them if in the hand. But I actually have written about this sort of thing, and stealing heavily from Aesop, who wrote it some 2,600 years ago, but I've been behind on my reading. Yeah.
Good morning. I know you're famed for your success, but I was curious if there were any particular moments in your life or mistakes or failures that you've made that were particularly memorable, what you may have learned from them, and if you had any particular advice for the students here in dealing with discouraging circumstances.
Yeah, I've made a lot of mistakes. Biggest mistake, well, not the biggest, necessarily the biggest, but buying Berkshire Hathaway itself was a mistake, because Berkshire was a lousy textile business, and I bought it very cheap. I'd been taught by Ben Graham to buy things on a quantitative basis. Look around for things that are cheap. And that I was taught that, say, in 1949 or 50. It made a big impression on me. So I went around looking for what I call use cigar butts of stocks. And the cigar butt approach to buying stocks is that you walk down the street and you're looking around for cigar butts, and you find this on the street, this terrible looking, soggy, ugly looking cigar, one puff left in it. But you pick it up and you get your one puff. Disgusting, you throw it away, but it's free. I mean, it's cheap. And then you look around for another soggy, one puff cigarette. Well, that's what I did for years. It's a mistake. Although you can make money doing it, but you can't make it with big money. It's so much easier just to buy wonderful businesses. So now I would rather buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. But in those days, I was buying cheap stocks. And Berkshire was selling below its working capital per share. You got the plants for nothing. You got the machinery for nothing. You got the inventory and receivables at a discount. It was cheap. So I bought it. And 20 years later, I was still running a lousy business. And that money did not compound. You really want to be in a wonderful business because the time is the friend of the wonderful business. You keep compounding, it keeps doing more business, and you keep making more money. Time is the enemy of the lousy business. I could have sold Berkshire, perhaps liquidated it, and made a quick little profit, one puff. But staying with those kind of businesses is a big mistake. So you might say I learned something out of that mistake, and I would have been way better off taking what I did with Berkshire is I kept buying better businesses. I started an insurance business, See's Candy, the Buffalo, all kinds of things. I would have been way better doing that with a brand new little entity that I'd set up rather than using Berkshire as the platform. Now I've had a lot of fun out of it. I mean, everything in life seems to turn out for the better, so I don't have any complaints about that, but it was a dumb thing to do. I went into U.S. Air. I bought a preferred stock in 1989. As soon as my check cleared, the company went into the red and never got out. I mean, it was really dumb. I mean, I've got an 800 number I call now whenever I think about buying an airline stock. I call them up any hour that, fortunately, I can call them at 3 in the morning, and I just dial it and I say, my name's Warren, I'm an aeroholic, and I'm thinking about buying this thing, and then they talk me down. I mean, it takes hours sometimes, but it's worth it, believe me. If you ever think about that buying an airline stock, call me and I'll give you the 800 number because you don't want to do it. But we got lucky in terms of how we eventually came out on it. But it was a dumb decision, all mine. And I've done biggest in terms of opportunity cost and eventual costs. I bought half interest in a Sinclair filling station when I was about 20 with a guy I was in the National Guard with. And I had about $10,000 then, and I put $2,000 in, and I lost it all. So that was 20%, and that means that the opportunity cost is now $6 billion of that filling station, which is a big price to pay for, getting to wipe a few windows and a few windshields and things like that. So actually, I like it when Berkshire goes down because it reduced the cost of that mistake on an opportunity cost. But the biggest mistakes we've made by far, biggest mistakes I've made by far are mistakes of omission and not commission. I mean, it's the things I knew enough to do, they were within my circle of competence, and I was sucking my thumb. And that is really, those are the ones that hurt. They don't show up anyplace. I probably cost Berkshire at least $5 billion, for example, by sucking my thumb 20 years ago or close to it when Fannie Mae was having some troubles, and we could have bought the whole company for practically nothing. And I don't worry about that if it's Microsoft because I don't know it. Because Microsoft isn't in my circle of competence. And so I don't have any reason to think I'm entitled to make money out of Microsoft or out of cocoa beans or whatever. But I did know enough to understand Fannie Mae, and I blew it. And that never shows up under conventional accounting. But I know the cost of it. I know. I passed it up. And those are the big mistakes. And I've had plenty of them. And unless I tell you about them in the annual report, and I resist the temptation sometimes, unless I tell you about them in the annual report, you're not going to know it because it doesn't show up under conventional accounting. But omission is way bigger than commission. There's big opportunities in life have to be seized. We don't do very many things, but when we get the chance to do something that's right and big, we've got to do it. And even to do it in a small scale is just as big a mistake almost as not doing it at all. I mean, you really got to grab them when they come. And because you're not going to get 500 great opportunities. You would be better off if when you got out of school here, you got a punch card with 20 punches on it. And every financial decision you made, you used up a punch. You'd get very rich because you'd think through very hard each one. I mean, you went to a cocktail party and somebody talked about a company, you didn't even understand what they did or couldn't pronounce the name, but they made some money last week and another one like it. You wouldn't buy it if you only had 20 punches on that card. There's a temptation to dabble, particularly during bull markets. In stocks, it's so easy. It's easier now than ever because you can do it online. Just you click it in and maybe it goes up a point and you get excited about that and you buy another one the next day and so on. You can't make any money over time doing that. But if you had a punch card with only 20 punches, you weren't going to get another one in the rest of your life. You would think a long time before every investment decision, and you would make good ones and you'd make big ones. And you probably wouldn't even use all 20 punches in your lifetime, but you wouldn't need to. Yep.
Mr. Buffett, good morning. In your comments about making mistakes and errors like that, can you talk a little bit about your sell discipline when you're in a position and you feel like it's no longer good? What criteria to use when you just finally abandon it?
Yeah, when I started out, the sell situation has changed over the years, because when I started out, I had way more ideas than money. I mean, I would go through Moody's manual. I went through it page by page, and then I went through it again page by page. And I found stocks in there that I could understand that were selling at like 2 times earnings, even 1 times earnings. Well, when you only have $10,000, that can get a little frustrating. And if you don't like to borrow money, which I never like to borrow money, so I was always coming up with more ideas than I had money. So I had to sell whatever I liked least to buy something new that just was compelling to me. And for a long time, I was in that mode. And now our problem is we have more money than ideas. So if you look at our annual report, which is on the internet at our homepage, BerkshireHathaway.com, you'll see something in the back called the Economic Principles of Berkshire. And you will see, which I believe in setting out for my partners. They are my partners. I don't look at them as shareholders. I look at them as partners. They're going to be my partners for life. So I want to tell them how I think. And if they don't agree with the way I think, that's fine, but I don't want them to be disappointed in me. So I lay out there and I say, in terms of our wholly owned businesses, we're not going to sell no matter how much anybody offers us for. I mean, if somebody offers us 3 times what something is worth at See's Candy, the Buffalo News, Borsheim's, whatever it may be, we're not going to sell it. I may be wrong in having that approach. I know I'm not wrong if I owned 100% of Berkshire, because that's the way I want to live my life. I've got all the money I can possibly need. It just amounts to a change in the newspaper story on my obituary and the amount of money that the foundation has. And to break off relationships with people I like and people that have joined me because they think it's a permanent home, to do that simply because somebody waves a big check at me would be like selling one of my children because somebody waved a big check. So I won't do that. And I want to tell my partners I won't do it so that they're not disappointed in me. More and more, with certain stocks, we've got that approach. Now, if we were chronically short of funds and had all kinds of opportunities coming, we might have a somewhat different approach. But our inclination is not to sell things unless we get really discouraged perhaps with the management, or we think the economic characteristics of the business change in a big way. I mean, and that happens. So, but we're not going to sell simply because it looks too high, in all likelihood. I mean, you can't make that 100%, but that's the principle under which we're operating. We're generating right now $5 billion of cash a year at least. So it's $100 million every week. And, just not, we've been talking here half an hour and I haven't done a damn thing. It's, the real question is how do you put it out intelligently? And if we were selling things, it'd be just that much more. So there may come a time when that would change. But we want to, and I have shareholders, partners, who would say, if you can get 3 times what See's Candy's worth, why don't you sell it? And that's why I want to be sure before they come in, they know how I think on that. I mean, they're entitled to know that. But, you really think for a minute, if you're going to get married, and you want a marriage that's going to last, not necessarily the happiest marriage, or one that Martha Stewart will talk about or anything, but you want a marriage that's going to last. What quality do you look for in a spouse? One quality. Do you look for brains? Do you look for humor? Do you look for character? Do you look for beauty? No. You look for low expectations. I mean, that is the marriage that's going to last. Both have low expectations. I mean, and I want my partners to be on the low side on expectations coming in, because I want the marriage to last. It's a financial marriage when they join me at Berkshire, and I don't want them to think I'm going to do things that I'm not going to do. So that's our guiding principle. The advice is all free, and your marital advice, everything else. Next.
Good morning. Mr. Buffett, I have a question regarding evaluation of the soundness of investment. In recent years, it appears that the use of tax sheltering in corporation is increasing, and such, reputable companies like UPS and others are involved in court battles over shelters with IRS. And as we know, most of these transactions are fairly artificial, but yet there is a profit there. From the investor perspective, do you think it's beneficial for investor that the company that they invest are involved in those shelters? And if so, do you think it would be helpful if those transactions are disclosed in statements, meaning the notes to statements?
I'm not sure I got that 100%. George, could you?
I will repeat.
Earl, did you?
Shortly.
Yeah.
If you think that involvement of corporations that you invest, or anybody for that matter invest in tax shelter, which is by some definition...
tax shelters?
Right.
I've never used one.
I'm not saying so. I'm asking if you know that corporation is involved in such activity that is beneficial in short term. Would you think that that's helpful for investors?
Well, there are perfectly legal ways to shelter taxes. I mean, we did and still do, but we were one of the earliest ones to go in for low-income tax housing credits. In fact, I met with first President Bush about that one, and that benefits us to a mild degree. It's not a big element of Berkshire. I mean, it's peanuts in terms of Berkshire's overall value, but it is a congressionally ordained tax benefit. I wouldn't call it exactly a shelter. It's a tax benefit that Congress has decided they're willing to offer businesses, and because they think it's the best way to generate low-income housing. So we participate in something, but it's not a big factor in what we do. And but there's nothing wrong with that. And then if you get into tax evasion, I mean, that's a whole different game. At that point, they ought to go to jail. But certain businesses, some insurance companies are reincorporated in Bermuda, and you can save a lot of taxes. You have to meet certain other tests which we wouldn't want to meet. But if we were willing to meet those other tests, there's nothing illegal or immoral about us moving to Bermuda. We're not going to do it. And but if the restrictions weren't there, I mean, the tax code is the rule book, and you follow the rule book. I think some of the things people do in terms of bending that rule book get very close to fraud, and sometimes cross the line into fraud. And when they do, I think they ought to be prosecuted. But that's another game. And incidentally, there has been more pushing on that, I would say, in the last 5 years, and certainly was my experience earlier. And there are more. I think now it's diminished in the last year or two, but a couple years ago there was some very aggressive marketing by some of the auditing firms, and of these, even with percentage shares of the gain to be paid to the auditors. I think that those things got fairly dubious, and particularly when they shopped for legal opinions, so that if you got caught doing these things, you can say, well, I was relying on this legal opinion, and therefore I shouldn't go to jail, but just pay the back taxes. So I don't know of anything we're associated with that has done that, but obviously if they push too far, we don't want to be there.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was curious, with the large number of people you now have with tremendous amounts of wealth, what do you think of the current state of philanthropy?
Well, I'll be out this week. Actually, I'm going to a Coca-Cola meeting, and I'm flying out to Seattle and talking to the United Way group out there. Seattle United Way raises more per capita, I believe, than any United Way in the country. And Bill Gates will be there. We're talking jointly. His mother was very active in United Way. But Bill is going to give away over $1 billion a year, and a lot more later on, but right now $1 billion. And it's very interesting. I mean, he is very rational about it, and he's very informed. In fact, he got somebody, I think his primary advisor in the medical field is a fellow who was with the CDC in Atlanta. And Bill reads 15 books a month on this. I mean, he can just absorb it. I wouldn't be able to get it that fast. But he just says with $1 billion, he wants to save as many lives per year as he can. So that's his objective. It's just as much a metric of his foundation as some other metric, return on capital, might be for a business. And he says, I'm going to spend $1 billion a year. How many lives can be saved for that? So he's gotten very heavily into vaccines and AIDS in Africa, a number of things. It's very rational. I personally think all of my 99-point-something% of my net worth will go to a foundation after the latter of my wife and I die. I mean, it's all going to go to a foundation. As far as I'm concerned, I got it from society. It's going to go to society. I've written a letter to my trustees, and I've got very few trustees. If you got a whole bunch of trustees, in my view, they just homogenize themselves down to sort of a lowest common denominator, because you get 30 people in a room, and prestigious people, but they'll all have their particular alma mater, and they'll all have their particular hospital, and it'll become a big trade-off game. You know, it'll be a little like Congress. So I have very few people, and I don't give them anything specific, because I tell them their judgment above ground will be better than my instructions from 6 feet underground. So I don't like to think that, but it's true. So I tell them, look, the society are the ones that don't have a natural funding constituency or are just damned intractable and very difficult to solve. So I tell them I am not going to haunt them at all if they spend big money on some terribly important problem and they fail, because they're taking on tough problems. When I buy businesses, I'm buying easy businesses. But the reason that big problems of society are big problems is that they're damn tough to solve. So they're swinging at bad pitches. I'm swinging at easy pitches in business, but they have to swing at bad pitches. But I tell them I want them to try and do it. And if they fail, it doesn't bother me at all. I tell them if they give $1 million here and $1 million there and $1 million there, they're not going to sleep, because I'm going to be haunting them. I'm going to come back every night. You know, I do not want the eyedropper approach used to philanthropy. But I want them to use their judgment to look at important problems that do not have a natural funding constituency. You know, if the government's going to fund it, fine. You know, I mean, they should be funding important problems, but we won't need to do it. The role of private philanthropy, in my opinion, is to fund things that don't have the natural constituency, and that's what Bill's doing. There aren't a bunch of people around that you can make an emotional appeal to make vaccines available to millions and millions of kids around the world. It doesn't tug at anybody's heartstrings. You can't name buildings after them. I mean, it just isn't the sort of thing that you can raise money for on an emotional basis. And there's nothing wrong with raising money on an emotional basis. But that is a problem that won't get solved by a funding constituency that's responding to that. But Bill is responding to what in his mind is the important thing, which is saving lives, and he doesn't care whether he gets his name on a building or whether anything happens or whether anybody knows about it. I mean, he gets publicity just because of the scale he's on, but he doesn't care about that. I can promise you that. So that's my philosophy, is that I got this money not because I'm a superior human being, not because I've done more for society than other people. I was wired the right way to be dropped into the United States at this particular time. I mean, it's a huge capitalistic society, and I'm wired, no credit to me, but I just born that way, so that I'm better at asset allocation than other people to some degree. Just like other people are better at all kinds of other things. And I was with 2 teachers out at Sun Valley that are doing more for society than I am, and this market system does nothing for them. Market system does all kinds of things for me. Gates says if I'd been born 5,000 years ago, you know, I'd have been some animal's lunch, you know, because I can't run very fast, and I can't climb trees. I mean, you know, and I could tell that animal was chasing me, wait till you see how I can allocate assets, But it wouldn't have made any difference. So here I am, I'm born now, just very, very lucky. And the odds when I was born in 1930, the odds were 50-1 against me being born in the United States. That's a terrible set of odds to face. And yet I was dropped down here, And if I'd been dropped down in Peru or someplace or China, I wouldn't have had a chance. So society is what does it for you. And it should go back, in my view, it should go back to society. If you've been lucky enough to be dropped into a society where your particular wiring pays off big, that's just luck. And there's nothing wrong with being lucky. I don't feel guilty about it or anything else, but I also don't feel that, I feel I have a lot of fun doing what I do, but I feel the money should go back into society, and it should go back as intelligently as it can. And the best way to do it intelligently is to have high-grade and intelligent people administering it at the time. And you don't know the problems that are going to be out there 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 30 years from now. But I do know if I've got a small number of high-grade, smart people, and high-grade is more important. If you gave me 20 extra points of IQ, but cheated a little on the high grade, I wouldn't take it because they got to be. There's so many chances to do things in a petty way or, to try to. People get subverted in their own minds to their own interests rather than the interests of the institution. So I really want super high-grade people doing it, and I've got them. And I think the money might do a lot of good. It may do no good, but it'll be operating in fields where if it does some good, that good probably wouldn't have been done otherwise. Yep.
I was just wondering, there's a lot of differences between the recent boom and bust in the stock market and the one in the 1920s, but there's also a lot of similarities. And those similarities are allowing people to draw the conclusion that stock prices will be depressed for some time to come. Where do you disagree and agree with that conclusion?
Well, the whole century is quite interesting. If you take the 20th century, it was an unbelievable century for the United States. The GDP per capita, and that's the way to think of it as per capita. Sometimes they talk about our GDP versus Europe's, but if their population's the same every year and ours goes up 1%, you've got to, in the end, you got to have a divisor as well as a numerator. And so GDP per capita in the 20th century in the United States went up 610%. Actually, qualitatively, it went up far more than that because you can't really measure, certain things in medicine or whatever it may be and improvements. But just on a quantitative basis, it went up every single decade, including the decade of the 30s. So here you had 100 years when basically the U.S. citizenry was improving their lot decade by decade by decade. The 30s, it was up 13%. Best decade was World War II. The 40s was up 36%. The worst decade was the First World War. So you get sometimes you can get in trouble on analogies. But in any event, it was a huge period. Interestingly enough, there were 6 big periods in there for the stock market in both directions. There were 3 big bull markets. From 1900 to 1921, the Dow went from 66 to 71, less than a 10% move in 20 years, less than 0.5% a year. You got dividends too, but 0.5%. So it didn't move. From 21 to 29, as you point out, it went from 71 to a high of 381 in September of 1929. Went up 500%. Well, obviously, the well-being of the country didn't go up 500% during that period, and the well-being of the country went up a whole lot more than 10% during that first 21 years. So you got this very uneven development. Then from September 1929 until the end of 1948, the Dow went from 381 to about 180. It was cut in half. And that was 18 long years. And yet the per capita GDP was moving right up during this whole period. So the economy was doing fine. From 48 to 65, the Dow went again from about 180 up to close to 1,000. Again, 5 for 1, which was far outstripping it. From 65 to 81, the Dow went down, literally. Well, again, per capita GDP. And then we've had this last period where it's gone up terrifically. If you take the whole 100 years, it went up 180 for 1. Every $1,000 became 180,000. But 43 and 3/4 years were those three big, huge bull markets, and 56 and 1/4 years were periods of stagnation, all in an economy that was doing fine, year after year after year. 56 and 1/4 years, net, the Dow was down a couple hundred points during that period, and the other 43 and 3/4 years made up the rest of this move from 66 to 11,000 some on the Dow. So you say to yourself, how could it be that you could have a country that was doing better and better and better and better? Citizens were living, every generation was living better than the one that preceded it, but you had these huge changes. Big gains a few times, long periods of stagnation. 20 years, that's a long time to do nothing. The answer is that investors behave in very human ways, which is they get very excited during bull markets and they look in the rearview mirror and they say, I made money last year, I'm going to make more money this year, so this time I'll borrow, or the neighbor says, I wasn't in last year when that neighbor was dumber than I made a lot of money, so I'm going to go in this year. So they're always looking in the rearview mirror. And when they look in the rearview mirror and they see a lot of money having been made in the last few years, they plow in and they just push and push and push on prices. And when they look in the rearview mirror and they see no money having been made, they just say this is a lousy place to be. So they don't care what's going on in the underlying business. And it's astounding, but that makes for huge opportunity, just huge opportunity. I've lived through roughly half, in an investing sense, about half that period. And I've had that long period of stagnation from 65 to 82, 17 years. I wrote an article for Forbes in 1979. I just said, how can this be? Pension funds in 1970 put 100 and some % of their new money in stock because they were wild about stocks. Then they got a lot cheaper and they put a record low in, 9% of their net new money in 1978 when stocks were way cheaper. People behave very peculiarly in terms of the reactions because they're human beings and they get excited when others get excited, they get greedy when others get greedy, they get fearful when others get fearful, and they'll continue to do so. And you will see things you won't believe in your lifetime and securities markets. And the country will do very well over time, but you will see these huge waves. And if you can stay objective throughout that, if you can detach yourself temperamentally from the crowd, you get very rich. And you won't have to be very bright. I'm sure you are, but you want, it doesn't take brains. It takes temperament. It takes the ability to sit there and look at something. When I started out in 1950, I would go through and find things at 2 times earnings, and they were perfectly decent businesses, and people wanted jobs at those companies, and everybody knew they were going to be around, and they wouldn't buy them at 2 times earnings, and that's when interest rates were 2.5%. I started selling securities when I was 21, and a Kansas City life insurance company happened to be a fairly prominent company in Omaha, and the policies they sold you, if you were buying life insurance from them, had a built-in assumption of 2% interest. The stock of Kansas City Life was selling at less than 3 times earnings. You were getting 35% if you bought the stock. No question about the soundness of the company. I went to the local agent. I figured, hell, I ought to be able to sell him a few shares of stock. The guy ought to understand it. He's got his whole life invested in this company. I went to the local agent who'd been with him for 20 years, and his name was Moose. And I said, Mr. Moose, I said, you're selling these policies with 2%. You may even have a few members of your own family, and you can buy into this company whose paycheck you depend on every month, and whose future your beneficiaries of these life policies depend on, and who you're selling them, a 2% investment on, and you can get 35% on your money. He said, stocks aren't any good, and I couldn't sell you. I was a lousy salesman. Well, you have to start with that, but it just blew me away. It blew me away. I thought sometimes I used to wonder if I was nuts, but those things, the same thing happened. In 1964, the Dow closed at 864. At the end of 1981, 17 years later, it closed at 865. It moved 1 point in 17 years. Now, that's not a big move. And that, you can't believe how discouraged people were during that period. But, people were living better. So things can go on a long time that don't make sense. And But they do come to an end. I mean, the internet thing, I mean, you had these companies selling for many billions of dollars that had practically no prospects of making any money. That's a bubble. But Herb Stein one time said, anything that can't go on forever will end. Now, that seems pretty... but think about that. And particularly think about it next time you're trying to do something just because the stock's gone up a whole lot, and your neighbor's made money or something. You've got to be... You just have to sit and think objectively and think about, would I buy this whole business? If it's an internet company that's got 100 million shares out and selling at 100, that's $10 billion. Is it worth $10 billion? If it's worth $10 billion, it's got to be able to give you, 700 or 800 million next year. And if it doesn't give you 700 or 800 million next year, it has to give you maybe 10% more than that the year after and continue to. There aren't a lot of businesses that can do that. And people just go crazy. And of course, it's fun. I mean, it's like that sign they put in brokerage offices that says, avoid hangovers, stay drunk. I mean, it's just so much fun to keep playing. But you got to do sensible things to get good results. Yeah. Next. Well, we got 3 people standing there, so let's do the 3 that are standing there. Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Hi.
Hi. I was wondering what your opinion is of the Federal Reserve and their actions taken recently. Do you feel they've done enough to boost the economy?
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of Alan Greenspan's over time. I've known him for a long, long time. We were on a board together at Cap Cities, and Alan is a very, very smart guy. He is motivated, in my opinion, entirely by what is good for the United States, the people of the United States. And so you couldn't have a better person in there. And the problem he may have is that because his tenure in office has been associated with this incredible bull market, that even though he wouldn't have claimed credit for it, that people might associate it because of the importance of the Fed generally. They might associate with him, so they may, if things don't work out so well, they may blame him as well. But I think his policy has generally been very good. You have to understand one thing about the Fed is that it's not as powerful as the mystique would make it. Its brake is better than its gas pedal. When the Fed wants to put on the brakes, we go for the windshield. I mean, the economy just, they can put on the brakes. Paul Volcker did it. He broke inflation by doing it. But I mean, when he put on the brakes in that period around 1980, I mean, people hated him. He was crucified for it, but it was the right thing to do. And he could do it. He did it all by himself. And and it was the only way because of the momentum that inflation was generating. It was the only thing it was what was needed then. Enormously unpopular. It's much harder for a Greenspan to put on the brakes because nobody wants him to put on the brakes, plus he's so visible. But he's put them on sort of gradually. But stepping on the gas pedal, he does not necessarily get the same result. It may help, but there are 1,000 other variables operating. And as you see in Japan, you can get down to 0 interest rates and you can't stimulate anything. So it isn't like the Japanese haven't read the same books we've read about economics. I mean, they've read Keynes and they've read the whole thing. So we're not smarter than they are. We don't have any secrets they don't have, but they don't know how to get their economy going. And, their GDP there has been gone no place, in the last 5 years, and there's still problems around. So easy money doesn't solve everything, but Greenspan could very well get blamed for the fact that he hasn't solved everything, and it's just not in his power to solve it. He can help in various ways, but I don't think you could have anybody better, and I think he's done the right thing to this point, but the right thing may not be quite as effective as people may hope that it would be. In economics, you always want to ask, and then what? You'll read in the paper, well, what happens if the Japanese start selling our government bonds, or what happens if they dump the dollar? They can't dump the dollar. There's no way to dump dollars. You can, or at least dollar assets, because if the Japanese want to sell our government bonds, if they sell them to us, they get a time deposit or a demand deposit at Citi, or they still own a dollar asset. If they sell them to the French, they may get some assets from the French, but now the French have it. I mean, the only way you can reduce foreign investment in the United States is to change it around so they're consuming more than from us, more than we're consuming from them. I mean, when we buy a television set from Japan. If we buy more television sets from them than they buy equivalent consumables from us, the exchange, what balances things is we give them some investment type asset, whether it's cash or a U.S. government bond or our stocks or our movie studios or our real estate or different things. And the only way that reverses is when we start running a trade surplus, which we're miles away from. So logically, if you read classic economics, you would believe that our currency would have been weaker over the recent years, and that it would be weak now. But there are other things operating, and that's one of the problems about economics, is there's never just one variable. There's usually hundreds of variables, and they operate with different impact at different times. I mean, it's not like a physics formula. I mean, well, I guess it would be if you got into the Heisenberg principle or something like that. But the formula has a lot of the same variables year after year, but the relative importance of those variables and how they interact with each other is never exactly the same. And that's what we find out, the Japanese find out, everybody finds out. And foreign currency, or the value of our dollar and currency rates, are defying what you would expect based on history. But as somebody said, if history were a perfect guide, the Forbes 400 would all be librarians. They just go and look it up in the books, and they'd always know all the answers. But history doesn't repeat itself, as Mark Twain said. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I mean, things come back, but they don't quite come back in the same form. And we'll understand all this perfectly in a few more years, why the dollar's behaved the way it has. But I think it would be useful net for the U.S. if the dollar were less strong.
Yes, Mr. Buffett, thanks for taking my question. My question pertains to small business, and my family's been in the truckload sector of transportation for about 50 years. And as you talked about the airline industry and all the mergers and acquisitions and things going on, and a lot of the smaller players being tossed out of the market, what do you see for people that, like in this room, for students that want to start a small business, and maybe they want to start in a business that is somewhat of a commodity type business, but as businesses, the large corporations get larger and their efficiencies increase, how can a small business compete with these people?
Yeah, in many areas, small businesses have an advantage. In other businesses, scale has a huge advantage. And I mean, you don't want to be a tiny carbon steel producer. On the other hand, when mini mills came along and learned how to use scrap more effectively than the older methods of making steel, they actually had an advantage. So scale is a huge advantage in some businesses. It's, the largest airlines haven't won. Southwest Airlines has won, starting with, just a few planes flying down there between Houston and Dallas. And they have become bigger, but their ambition hasn't been to be the biggest. And, they probably buy their fuel just as cheap as United, and they probably bought it, when they're a lot smaller. Walmart is a classic example. I mean, who would have thought 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I mean, here was Sears with a 100-story plus building in Chicago, had access to money far cheaper than Sam Walton. I mean, Sam Walton's credit was not as good as Sears. Every supplier wanted to do business with Sears. Nobody had ever heard of Sam. Every real estate developer who was developing a new shopping center went first to Sears, and Sam got the short end. So here's a guy starting in Bentonville, Arkansas, and he kills them over time. Just plain kills them. And disadvantage in buying, disadvantage in borrowing, disadvantage in real estate. Advantage, Sam Walton, and his ability to inspire, in the end, hundreds of thousands of people to be enthusiastic about going to work and doing the right things over time. So I would be just as optimistic about small business generally. Now, there's certain areas where scale is just plain important. But I see no disadvantage. We intentionally at Berkshire, we have 112,000 employees, more in Georgia than in any other state in the union, incidentally. We employ a lot up near Dalton, and we employ a lot of people in Macon at Geico. And we intentionally, with our 112,000 employees, we probably have, I don't know how many business units, but lots. And we only have 13.8 people at headquarters. I'm not the 0.8, incidentally. I resent it when people think that. I'm a full, but we have one woman that works 4 days a week. And that's all we have at headquarters, 112,000 people, 105 billion of market cap. But we intentionally keep our units small. We think, we want them to have the nimbleness, the responsiveness to the customer particularly, that will turn them, that essentially will more than offset anything that the scale of having maybe a little more purchasing power or something will develop. We own a home furnishings business in Utah, run by a fellow named Bill Child. He was featured in Fortune about one issue ago. The cover story was God in Business. Bill was the #1 illustration. Bill took that business from his father-in-law when it was doing $250,000 a year, and he now has over half the business in Utah in his field, about close to $400 million. He built it by thinking about the customer. And the truth was, he was competing with Sears, he was competing with Levitt's, was a huge furniture retailer in the past. He was competing with everybody. But all he thought about from the moment he got up in the morning was, how do I take care of my customer? And that wins. We have a business in Omaha, some of you may have heard of. It's the largest home furnishing store in the world. In Omaha, which only has a SMSA of 650,000 people. It's on 72 acres. It does $325 million in one location, which happens to be $500 for every man, woman, and child in the SMSA, but it draws from beyond that. That business comes about, or has resulted, from an investment of $500 in 1937 by a woman who walked out of Russia in 1921. She walked out, got on a peanut boat, landed in Seattle with a tag around her neck. She couldn't speak one word of English. The American Red Cross looked at the tag. It said Fort Dodge, Iowa. They got her to Fort Dodge, Iowa. She couldn't pick up the language. She was there 2 years. She said she felt like a dummy. So she came to Omaha because there were other Russian Jews there, and she'd at least have somebody to talk to. Her little girl started school, Frances. Frances would come home at night and teach her mother the words she learned in school that day. That's how this woman, Rose Blumpkin, learned the English language, but from her daughter from kindergarten on, teaching her the words. She brought 7 siblings over from Russia, one at a time, $50 every time she saved $50. She sold used clothing and other works. She got her 7 siblings over, her mother and father, and by 1937, 16 years after she got here, she saved $500. She got on a train, went to Chicago, to the American Furniture Mart, which was this huge, impressive thing. She was smart as hell, but she thought like a peasant in a way, and she saw this building and she decided to name her company the Nebraska Furniture Mart. She went in and bought $500 worth of, she bought about $2,000 worth of merchandise. All the way back to Omaha, she worried because she thought, I owe $1,500, and she only had a $500 equity. So she got to Omaha. She took the bed, the sofa, the refrigerator out of her own home to sell fast so she could get the money so she could pay on time. She took that business and built it from that start. No one would sell to her. She went into court 4 times because the carpet manufacturers tried to keep her from selling at a discount, and she went into court and told the judge, because she figured out ways to buy this stuff in various nefarious ways had other people buy it for her, and she said, look, I pay $3 a yard for this carpet. Brandeis sells it for $6.98. She says, I sell it for $3.98. Just tell me, Judge, how much you want me to rob people. She defended herself. Papers wrote it up. The judge bought carpet from her the next day. I mean, it was marvelous. Brandeis isn't selling anymore. They were the huge department store in Omaha. She put everybody out of business. And the punchline, she worked till she was 103. She sold me the business when she was 89. And she didn't have an audit. I went out to see her one afternoon. I took a check out with me because I knew she wanted to do something. And I said, Mrs. B, here's the money. I said, I don't need an audit. Just tell me whether you owe any money. She said, I've never owed any money since I owed those guys back in 1937. And she said, it's all free and clear. She'd never seen a balance sheet. She didn't know what accounting terms meant, but she understood the nature of the business. And I told her, I said, I'd rather have your word, than an audit from every one of the big 6 or big 8 or whatever there were, the number at the time of the top auditing firms. And she worked till she was 103. She died at 104. She had 3 siblings at her funeral. I mean, those are some genes. Her son works there now. He's 82 or 3, and the 3 sisters are all alive. But the punchline is she couldn't read or write. This woman could not read or write. If you told her this room was 68 feet by 43, she would tell you how many square yards it was like that. She never went to school a day in her life. She would tell you how much that was at $5.98 a yard. She'd add the tax. She'd knock off something because she liked your looks, and that would be it. And that's that is that you can't beat that, and you can't replicate that at General Motors. You can't institutionalize that. The person who brings that kind of drive to a business and does it day after day and thinks about their customer, and that's all she did. She raised 4 kids in the process too, but you can't. It can't miss. And no, you don't have to worry if you're an entrepreneur. In most fields, there's some fields where you can't do it because there are scale aspects to it. But in most fields, you'll kill people. Bob Shaw did that with Shaw. Nobody ever heard of Shaw in carpet 30 years ago, and he's got 40% of the carpet business in the country. So it's a great field of opportunity out there, and I don't know about trucking specifically, but I wish you the best on it. And you won't be at a disadvantage in many fields if you're small, and you'll actually have an advantage. George, thank you.
Mr. Buffett, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your ideas and your wonderful stories with us today. We are truly honored and pleased that we've had this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. I'd like to thank a couple people before we conclude for helping with the logistics. Associate Dean Bob Gatewood, our Director of Alumni Relations, Marie Garrison. Thank both of you. David Dodson, our Director of Communications. There's a lot of work and effort went into this, and I thank all of you for all that you've done. And Earl, again, thank you for helping make this possible. Mr. Buffett, we have a parting gift for you, but it needs to be placed into context before we show you what it is. In your most recent newsletter to your annual report to the shareholders, you discussed some of the things that you look for in making acquisitions, and one of the things you talked about was owners. You look for owners who care who they sell to, and that was important to you. I'd like to quote from your report. When a business masterpiece has been created by a lifetime or several lifetimes of unstinting care and exceptional talent, it should be important to the owner what corporation is entrusted to carry on its history. A little bit further down you say, how much better it is for the painter of a business Rembrandt to personally select its permanent home than to have a trust officer or uninterested heirs auction it off. Well, we believe that many of these words apply to you as well. You too have created a business masterpiece. You too have created a Rembrandt. What we have today is a lighthearted portrait, a lighthearted characterization that we hope captures some of the business milestones in your career, and we hope also captures some of that quick-witted humor that you demonstrated today. It was painted by a good friend of ours and a well-known artist, lives here locally, Alan Campbell. Alan is with us, and he will help unveil it today. Alan, please come down. Now, when he unveils this, please understand that you're not going to be able to see the detail of this from where you're sitting, but we would invite you to come down and walk past it as you leave today. Alan, if you're going to speak, come over to the microphone, please.
Well, thank you, and Mr. Buffett, I hope you'll maintain your sense of humor, which appealed to me greatly when reading your corporate report, and this is going to be a test of that famous humor. But it's intended to be a portrait both of you and of your company and of your values. And when Marie Garrison, my girlfriend, the alumni director here, told me you were coming, and I read the comments about the Rembrandts and lying on your back and feeling like you could lie on your back and paint the ceiling every day at Berkshire, you basically opened the door with your own words. So, and just on an aside, my brother's one of your pilots for Executive Jet. So. The one thing that's not included is a reference to the jewelry company, so you've been spared jewelry. This is based on a very famous Rembrandt self-portrait, if anybody's information.
Mr. Buffett will sign autographs. If you've got books with you you'd like him to sign, we'll set up a table down front here. As for the next 15 or 20 minutes, if you'd like to take a picture, if you've got a camera with you, please come on up. Don't hesitate. And thank you all for coming and participating today. It was a wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Warren, for coming this evening and honoring us. And I don't think you need much of an introduction, but I just will say that I think it's fair to say that you are the most respected investor in the world, and I think the most respected businessman in the world, not just because you've made a great deal of money, but because you've done it with enormous integrity and humility, and as people will see tonight, with enormous sense of humor. And in addition to being a business person that everybody would aspire to be, he has in recent years become, with Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, the largest philanthropist in the world. I think his net worth might be in excess, a little bit higher than mine, I'd say, about $50 billion more or less, and he's committed to give 99% of that away, and he's in the process of doing so. So thank you on behalf of the country and everybody else for doing that. Your background is pretty well known, but some people may not know that you actually spent much of your formative years in Washington, D.C. Your father was elected to the Congress, so you moved here. You went to Alice Deal Junior High School, got a lot of C's and D's, as I understand. And then you went to Woodrow Wilson High School, finished 16th in your class, but you were...
Class of 17, we might add.
Right. Well, you were working, you were delivering papers in the morning and delivering papers in the evening and so forth. And my question really to begin is that many people who grew up in Washington love living here and they want to stay here, so they hope to aspire to be the head of a lobbying firm someday or the head of a congressional staff or something. Do you ever have any regrets that you might have been able to make something of yourself had you stayed here?
Well, I'm still young, David. I may come back. I went out to Alice Deal today. First time I'd been there in 65 years, and I met the principal. I went to Wilson also today, but at Alice Deal I tried to get my record expunged, but I had no luck.
Well, you told me earlier today that you lived in Spring Valley.
Yeah, I lived at 49th Street between Van Ness and Fordham Road, yeah.
And so today, with the camera crew, you knocked on the door of the person who was living in your house. What did that person say?
Well, we had a good time. I mean, the house seemed to have shrunk, but she was very a wonderful woman. She's lived in the house for 30-plus years, and we got along very well. And then we retraced my paper route.
So when you were growing up in Washington, you were already a business person.
Well, I thought so. I didn't get a lot of public recognition as such. But
so you were making money, and as I understand it, you filed your first tax return when you were 14 years old?
Yeah, it was for the year when I was 13, and 13. I filed it when I was 14, yeah.
Okay. And did you think the tax rates were too high then, or not?
It hurt more in those days. I did deduct my bicycle and my watch as business expenses, and only because the statute of limitations is applied. I took them entirely. Apparently, I never used my bicycle for pleasure or my watch. I never looked at my watch except when I was delivering papers.
So after you graduated from Woodrow Wilson, you then went to actually the University of Pennsylvania
Correct.
for a year and a half, and then you transferred back to the University of Nebraska. Why did you leave Penn? That was a great business school. Why did you leave?
Yeah, I felt I would. I wanted to quit after 1 year, to give you the honest answer on it. My father talked me, he kind of talked me into going to college in the first place, and then he talked me into going a second year, but he said if I went a second year, then I could drop out. And so then I went back to Nebraska. That way I got out of college in 3 years, and so it sped things up. And I plan to live in Nebraska.
So when you graduated from the University of Nebraska, you applied to Harvard Business School and were rejected.
That's true.
Has Harvard ever announced that they've regretted that decision?
Well, I understand the development officer is kind of unhappy.
So you rejected by Harvard, you went to Columbia Business School, and then you met the man who you really idolized, Ben Graham. And when you took his class, was he as great as you had thought he was going to be?
He really was. He only taught one semester, one class. I mean, he came up from Wall Street and taught this class. That's the reason I went to Columbia. And I knew I'd already read all the books and everything. But it was inspirational just to be around him, and it made a real difference in my life.
So when you graduated, you wanted to go work for him and his firm, and then he rejected you for an interesting reason. In those days, I understand that there were Jewish firms and non-Jewish firms, and his was a Jewish firm, and you weren't Jewish, so he said because you weren't Jewish, he didn't hire you. Is that right?
That's true. And I was ready to convert, believe me. I think they might have felt it was a little phony at the time. But it was true that there were very few firms in Wall Street that would hire Jews at that time. And Ben only employed 5 or 6 people. But he told me to the extent that they were able to employ 5 or 6 people, he really felt that the Jews could not get into most jobs in Wall Street, and that they were going to employ only Jews.
Well, his name was Ben Graham, but actually his real name was
Ben Grossbaum. Well, his parents, I think they changed their name. Yeah, my son is named Howard Graham Buffett, named after Ben, and he's very glad that Ben's father changed his name.
So you moved back for a while to Nebraska, but then he ultimately changed his mind, and you went to work for Ben Graham.
I kept pestering him. Yeah, I made a real pest of myself.
And in those years, what did you aspire to do? Did you aspire to become a very wealthy person? Would you want to be buying stocks? Would you want to buy companies? What was your aspiration in those early days?
I loved just analyzing securities. I just spent hours and hours and hours. I kept turning the pages of Moody's, which instead of going, you had no internet then or anything else, so you had 2 sources of information, Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And we happened to have these sets of Moody's. They were in aggregate, probably about 8,000 pages, about 5 different manuals. And I went through those page by page.
And, well, it must have been exciting.
Yeah, it's a little strange. I mean, I actually went to Amazon a few years ago, and I found an old 1951 Moody's. Now, everybody else is going there for Playboy magazine, but I'm ordering the old Moody's. You've got a strange guy here.
Well, when you were working in New York, you were attracted to one of the companies that Ben Graham was involved with, which was Geico.
Absolutely.
As I understand, you came down and knocked on the door of Geico, and you just started talking with them. And
yeah, it was really a lucky day. I was at the Columbia University Library, and I looked up Ben in Who's Who in America, and it had a whole bunch of things, but it said Chairman, Government Employees Insurance Company. So I asked the librarian, how can I learn more about this? I'd never taken any courses in insurance. And he said, well, there's this big BEST manual. If you read that, you can find out about the company. And there was 1 page on government employees insurance. So that Saturday, I got on the first train, and I came down to Washington, and I went to the headquarters of what was then called Government Employees Insurance. And to my total surprise, the place was locked. I mean, people didn't work, and people normally worked on Saturday. People in Washington didn't seem to work on Saturday. So I kept pounding on the door, and finally a janitor came. And I said to the janitor, I said, is there anybody here I can talk to except you? Now, he didn't seem to get offended at that particular introduction. So he said, there's a fellow up on the I think, 6th floor, and he's the only one here. And he was a man named Lorimer Davidson, and Lorimer Davidson changed my life in a big way. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he talked with me for maybe 4 hours on Saturday and gave me an education like I'd never gotten in school.
And so you liked it so much, you eventually bought the whole company, right?
It's one of those things, yeah. It took a few years.
So when you were starting your investment partnership, I think you started around 1956 with a partnership.
That's correct.
Right? And as I understand it, if somebody had put $10,000 in 1956 and had stayed with you and kept stock that they could have gotten when you liquidated some of the partnerships, that $10,000 would be worth roughly $500 million today?
That's about right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So those people are very grateful to you who did that, right?
No, I was grateful to them, though. I mean, they were betting on a 25-year-old, you know, who looked about 20 and acted about 12. So I, you know, and actually they were mostly relatives. I mean, it's my father-in-law and sister and her husband, my aunt.
So your investment partnership started, you started buying companies and buying stocks. And one of the companies you bought was Berkshire Hathaway. And though your company is now very famous, it's named Berkshire Hathaway, that was not one of your best investments, was it?
It was really dumb. Yeah. I mean, it was what I used to call Graham's approach on buying very cheap stocks that weren't very good companies, cigar butts, because it would be like walking down the street and finding a cigar butt that there was one puff left in. And it didn't cost anything, and it was kind of disgusting, right. But it didn't cost anything. But I thought Berkshire Hathaway was that kind of a company, and it wasn't much of a puff either.
Right. Well, so, you know, your company is named Berkshire Hathaway. You've sold that company many years ago. Did you ever think of changing the name?
No. I don't do much of that.
Okay. So when you started, originally you were buying stocks, you picked stocks, but then you started buying whole companies. Was that a different skill set? And how did you learn to buy and operate these companies?
Well, when I buy 100 shares of XYZ company, I look at it as buying the whole company. And so I've always looked at buying stocks as buying businesses. So it really wasn't a different situation. Now, I couldn't resell it, and I couldn't, if I owned the stock, I couldn't change managements, which I could if I owned the whole company. But it was basically the same approach. I'm a better investor because I'm a business person, and I'm a better business person because I'm an investor. They cross over.
Well, today, Berkshire Hathaway has how many different companies that are part of the
Got about 75, but some of those own more companies. So
you have 75 companies. You have about
270,000 employees.
270,000 employees. How do you manage all that? You have a very small office. How many people do you have in your office managing all this?
Well, we're now up to 24. We're on one floor. We're never going to leave one floor. I tell them they can hire all the people they want, but we're not going to leave one floor. So if they want people sitting on their lap, go to it, you know.
So do you sit in your office during the day looking at new ideas for companies? Is that how you spend your time?
I like to read a lot. So I read newspapers, and I read all kinds of financial information. And basically, I'm looking for one good idea a year.
And do people send you letters over the transom? Has any of those ideas ever worked?
Occasionally, but not very often. But I only need one a year.
Okay.
And we're in June, incidentally, David, if you want to help me out.
All right. Okay. Well, we have a couple companies we'd like to sell to you, but you don't pay high prices. But so in your office, do you have a computer in your office that you use?
Not in my office, but other people in the office have them.
So I know you're not a famous technology person, but do you have an iPad or do you do internet things?
Oh, I do internet things. Yeah, I love the internet. I mean, the internet, it's fascinating to me because it's probably affected my life, you know, almost as much as, say, Bill Gates did. When Bill and I appear together, sometimes we use the trick question of, aside from email, which one of us is on the computer more? And the answer is me.
Because you play bridge on the computer.
I play bridge on the internet.
And
right.
every night you spend...
Yeah, a couple hours a night.
And after all these years of doing it, are you a champion?
No, I'm not even close. I just have a good time it's the most interesting game I've found.
And do people know that they're playing with you over the internet?
is the name T-Bone, and it's gotten around that I am T-Bone. Yeah, I used to put my age as 103, so when I did something dumb, people would say for a guy 103, he's not bad. But
So you met over the years Bill Gates. How
Right.
did you first meet Bill?
what?
How did you first meet him?
I met him on July 5th, 1991. Meg Greenfield, who some of the people here probably knew, had a house out in Bainbridge Island out right there in Seattle. And she'd called me in the late 80s, and she said, Warren, I love Seattle. Do I have enough money to buy a second place? And I said, Meg, anybody that calls me and asks does have enough. It's the ones that don't call. So she bought this house, and she wanted to show it to me then in 1991. So actually, Kay Graham, Raleigh Evans, maybe one or two others went out there and visited Meg. And then Meg knew the senior Gateses, so she called up Bill Sr. and Mary Gates and said, I've got this crew out here, and could we drop down? And Mary said, fine. And then Mary called up Bill and said, Warren Buffett's coming down, and would you like to come down? He said, hell no. What do I have in common with that guy? You know, he doesn't understand technology. You know, he's hopeless. And Mary was very determined, and she said, you know, you're going to come, Bill. And so they negotiated a while, and finally they got down to where he said he'd come down for, I don't know, an hour and 27 minutes or some other thing. And he came down, and we hit it off, and we were still talking 10 hours later, and we became good friends.
But he never convinced you to buy Microsoft stock or buy technology companies?
He didn't try to. He tried to get me to use a computer.
Did that work?
Eventually. When I learned I could play bridge on it, I got interested. I still don't understand what happens with it, though.
I thought he originally said, I'll get the most beautiful woman working at Microsoft and come and install
That's what he did, but he was engaged to her, so Melinda, so it didn't work.
So as you got to know Bill better, did he influence your views on how to make investments, or influence your views on philanthropy?
I wouldn't say too much. We have a group of maybe 50 people that started getting together in 1968. We meet every other year. Don Graham, who's here tonight, is
the Buffett group.
Yeah, and at those meetings we would talk about various subjects, and philanthropy was an important subject. So I think it was maybe in 1993 or something like that. We had a meeting. I think it was in Ireland at that time, and I actually brought along the Gospel of Wealth for everybody to read. We discussed it then. But so our thinking sort of evolved together in a way.
But have you ever regretted not getting involved in giving away money earlier in your life, or you've done it?
My wife regretted that. She thought she liked the idea of giving away. We both agreed on giving away all the money. I mean, once we had everything we wanted, and we've had everything we wanted. I mean, and the surplus wealth I have has no utility to me. It has all kinds of utility to the rest of the world if used properly. Right. So we agreed on that early. She would have liked the idea of giving away more of it earlier, and I felt that I was going to be a better compounding machine than most places, and that there would be a whole lot more to give away later on. So I told her, I'll pile it up and you unpile it. You know.
Okay. All right. Now, your father was a very conservative Republican congressman,
right?
And you were probably a liberal Democrat. Is that a fair?
Well, yeah, I was always very conservative back.
You were conservative or when he was alive,
right.
And then you later moved further to the left. And it's fair to say you're a liberal Democrat now, or?
Yeah, I'm not a card-carrying Democrat. I support certain Republicans, and I have, and actually this year I gave some money to a Republican congressman.
And you've become famous recently in Washington for, among other things, the Buffett rule, which says that people's, I guess, tax rates should be at least as high as their secretaries.
Yeah, in terms of the aggregate of payroll and income taxes. I couldn't get a disease named after me, so I had to settle for a tax. I mean.
And have any of your friends suggested that you compensate your secretary in capital gains kind of things so she could pay a lower rate?
She's been suggesting that lately, yeah, right. Yeah, she's always on the phone with some tax advisor now. Now, the interesting thing is people have speculated about how much money she made, but the tax rate actually above $106,000 for most people goes down if you take the aggregate of payroll and income taxes out, because the payroll tax is the most regressive of all and quits at that point. And so actually between, say, 106 and 200, in most cases, the rate would go down.
Well, your financial acumen is pretty well known. So we now have in our country $15.5 trillion of debt in our federal government, and $1 trillion a year or so adding up. What would you do if you were able to wave a wand and try to fix our debt problem or deficit problem?
Well, I think I would do what everybody in this room would do. I mean, if you ask everybody here how much the federal government should be raising annually or in aggregate over the next 10 years, the answers would come in somewhere between 18.5% and 19.5%, which is close to what's been the situation since World War II. If you ask them how much the government should be spending, they'd probably come in at 21%. Someone come in at 20.5 or 21.5. And incidentally, you can have a 2 percentage point deficit relative to GDP, and the debt to GDP will not grow. I mean, in fact, it probably will shrink it just a touch. So you can have a couple percent deficit on average. And I would take the plan that 90% of the people here would come up with to get to that 19% of revenue and or to get to 21%. It can be Simpson Bowles, it can be a bunch of different things. And no one's going to agree 100% on every point. But I think we do agree on the fact that we probably should be raising 18.5% to 19%, and we should be spending 21 or thereabouts. And that means getting more from taxes, and it means cutting expenditures. And the problem is that the Democrats don't want to talk about what expenditures they would cut, and the Republicans don't want to talk about increasing revenues.
So would you be in favor of increasing the capital gains tax, or no?
Yeah, I would be in favor of that. But we can come to, we're raising, we'll say, 2.4, 2.5 trillion now. We have to raise, probably 300 or 400 billion more than that. And that can be done. I mean, we've done it straight through. I mean, and I've operated under all kinds of tax rates, including 39.6% on capital gains. And the country has grown under all these circumstances. Our country works. But somebody has to step up and say where it comes from. It won't come from, just talking about reform doesn't solve anything on either the expenditure side or the revenue side. I mean, you've got to get specific about it. And like I said, I'll bet if everybody in this room designed a plan, I could sign on to 90% of them.
And today, the economy in the United States is thought to be growing about 2.5% a year. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's any chance of a recession in the near term?
I think it's very low unless events in Europe develop in some way that spill over here big time. But incidentally, if the economy grows 2% a year and population grows 1% a year, that means each generation is living 20% better than the generation before, and it means in a century, people are living 3 times as well as they lived at the start of the century. So, I mean, our rates of gain in the way people live have been dramatic. In my lifetime, I was born in 1930, there's 6 times the real GDP per capita as when I was born. 6 times in one person's lifetime. We have a system that works. I mean, and it'll keep working. It may not work at 6 times for the next 80 years, but it'll work. It'll be 2.5 times or 3 times.
Now, are you worried about the euro going away? Do you think Europe would allow the euro to go away, or?
That's the big question. I mean, Lincoln said that, a house divided cannot stand, and half slave, half free wouldn't work. And we've got a system where they're half in and half out. I mean, they're in on a common currency, and they're not in on common fiscal policy or common culture or common labor practices. And that house will fall, but that doesn't mean it has to. And it means that they have to reconcile some of these things. It can't be half slave, half free.
Now, you invest most of your money, I guess, in the United States.
Yeah.
Have you increasingly been investing outside, particularly in the emerging markets, or you're not as comfortable investing in the emerging markets?
I'm comfortable in any place I understand the business well, and to some extent the rules that they operate in, and where I've got the right management. And so we will buy a business, in any one of 40 countries tomorrow if it's the right kind of business. But most businesses I hear about are in the United States. They think of Berkshire here. We're on the radar screen here to a greater extent than around the world.
So I understand that somebody from Israel sent you a letter over the transom, a 1.5-page letter, and you ultimately bought that company that person was talking about for $4+ billion?
We bought 80% of it for $4 billion, and he wanted me to go see it. He told me what a wonderful plan he had and everything, and I said, I'm not going to go see. I don't go to Iowa, as far as that's concerned. and he said, no. He said, you've never seen a plant like this. And I said, Eitan, I said, I love your business. I love you. I'll give you $4 billion, but I'm not going to go to, I got to start crossing oceans or anything crazy like that. So he said, well, if you buy the business, will you come? And I said, yes. So we bought the business. And then I went to Israel, and it was everything he said, and he was very pleased. And I said, yeah, I said, if I'd seen this thing, I'd have paid you more money. So. That's why I don't go visit businesses.
So what about China? Do you invest much there? You go to China very much?
We've had two big investments. I was sitting in 2002 or 2003 reading the report of PetroChina, and fortunately it was in English. And I put about $500 million into PetroChina. The government of China owned about 90% of it. We owned 1.3%. So between the two of us, we controlled the company. And we made quite a bit of money out of it. It was a very, very cheap company. I mean, it was one of the huge oil companies in the world. The whole company was selling for $35 billion in the market, and that was ridiculous.
Now, one of your most famous investments is Coca-Cola. You bought it relatively cheaply.
It's very good for you, everybody.
Now, when you
I don't care whether you drink it, just pour it on your neighbor, but open the can.
Now, when you were a young boy, you were addicted, I was told, to Pepsi. How did you switch to Coke?
Well, I would like to say, of course, that I just finally grew up and understood. When I was a kid, Pepsi was 12 ounces for a nickel, and Coke was 6.5 ounces for a nickel. And if you have any insights into my personality, you'll know which I bought.
So, of the investments you've made over the years at Berkshire Hathaway, which one would you say was the single best investment? Is there one that you really are most proud of?
Well, the one I'm probably the most emotionally attached to is Geico because of a bunch of reasons, but it goes back to a day in January of 1951, a Saturday. And that, what Lorimer Davidson did for me changed my life. And he didn't have to do it. I mean, I walked in there as some 20-year-old kid on a Saturday, and he spent 4 hours educating me, and then he became a friend for life. And then subsequent people are Jack Byrne and Tony Nicely, who's here tonight. I mean, it's just been a wonderful association, whether we made any money or not. But we've done pretty well on the investment too. But beyond that, it has a special meaning to me.
Are there investments that you really wish you had never done? What's your worst investment?
I made a lot of terrible deals, and the worst. It's hard to. Probably the worst deal will be one I make in the future. But the current title, I bought a company, and incidentally, I did it. I mean, we do not have PowerPoints around or people explaining this stuff to me. I just go out and do them. And we bought a company called Dexter Shoe. George Mitchell's here tonight. He knows the company. And we paid $400 million for it, which went to zero. But we paid $400 million in stock. And the stock we gave up is probably worth maybe $3 or $4 billion today. So whenever Berkshire goes down, I feel better about that deal.
Wow.
I mean,
What about the deals you passed on? You famously passed on Intel when it was getting started, I thought. And other.
Yeah, I knew Bob Noyce pretty well, and we bought it. We bought the converts when they were private, just because of Bob. We bought them at Grinnell College, and the endowment of Grinnell College went from $8 million to $1 billion in about 12 or 14 years. So, and Intel was a help on that. But in the end, I don't worry about things I don't understand. I mean, I think it was Tom Watson Sr. said, "I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots." Right. And there's a lot to that. And knowing your circle of competence is where that perimeter is enormously important. And the fact that there's all kinds of things I can't do, and there's plenty of companies I can't analyze, but I don't have to worry about that.
Of all the companies you bought, maybe the one that brought you the most trouble was Salomon. When you bought it, at one point it was almost, in effect, put into bankruptcy, and you had to go and run the company. Was that the most difficult experience you had at Berkshire Hathaway?
I would say that probably was, yeah. I was there as CEO for 9 months and 4 days, and it was 20 years ago, and I think I remember every day of it.
So today, when you have all these managers running your 75 different companies, do they call you every day and say, I got this problem or that problem, or how often do you talk to them?
No, if they need to call me, they're in trouble. We buy businesses where the managers come with them. And there are some managers that I don't talk to once a year, and there's one I talk to almost every day. After the one that I talk to almost every day, I would say the highest frequency would be maybe once a week. But they always call me. I don't call them.
Now, when you want to make an investment, you have a board of directors. Do you ever ask them, I've heard that you will buy a railroad for 20-some billion and not tell your board of directors.
I told a few of them.
A few of them, okay.
That was an exception. That I told them, not that part of why we're able to make deals is because we can act fast. They know we have the money. They know we'll do the deal. We closed on October 6th, 2008, on a $6.5 billion investment in Wrigley in conjunction with Mars. And they knew we would have the $6.5 billion and that we would close on that day. People weren't closing on anything. And so it's a real advantage to be able to pull the trigger. And if we have to go through lots of presentations and everything, I mean, I've been on 19 corporate boards, and you know, every deal works on the PowerPoint. You know, so it's a show and tell type thing, and I don't really participate in it.
So recently came out in court discussion that in the insider trading thing that's going on relating to an investment you had made in Goldman.
Right.
It came out that you had set the deal and you told the investment banker this is the deal, and they had to get back to you, but you said don't call for a few hours because you're going to Dairy Queen with your grandchildren. Is that right?
That's true.
You didn't want to be disturbed on a deal?
Well, I knew what I would do, and I told them what I would do. And if they wanted to do it, fine. If they didn't want to do it, fine. I mean, we don't really negotiate at Berkshire. It's just I don't have enough time, you know, to spend the rest of my life, you know, negotiating with people. So I tell them what I'll do, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't work, fine. Then.
Now, famously, people wonder who will be your successor, and I wonder if tonight you wanted to give us any insights into that.
Well, I have left the directors a Ouija board, and I plan to keep in contact with them.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I don't want to disappoint you, but you're not on the short list, David.
Can I be on the long list? So
we're in perfect shape for it, though. I will say that we've got successors that are, in most ways are better than I am.
But you expect that Berkshire will be around for 20, 30, 40 years as
Forever.
a big...
It's built to be forever. It has a special culture. It has directors who are committed to that. It has managers. We have an organization that would reject anybody that tried to tamper with that culture. And I think it is special, and it can stay special.
So today, having achieved all that you have achieved, you've got the admiration of virtually everybody in the world for what you've done. What kind of motivates you to keep going? What are your aspirations over the next 5 years or so?
I'm having the time of my life. I mean, I get to do every day exactly what I like to do with people who I love and who seem to like me pretty well. And it doesn't get any better than that. I tell the students that come to see me, and I have 48 universities come out every year, I tell the students, take the job you would take if you didn't need a job. And I've got the job that I don't need a job, and I've got that job.
Now, you're giving away 99% of your wealth. You have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren.
That's it.
And any of them ever say, maybe you could leave some of that to me, or they've never...
Well, I'm leaving some of it to them. And one of the things I do is that I don't write a will very often, but when I write a will, I give it to my children first before I sign it. They all read it. They're the executors, and I want 2 things. I want them to understand exactly what's in it, and secondly, I want them to agree with it. I mean, and if they don't, I want them to talk it out now, and we'll figure out what makes sense. And so, every 5 or 6 years or 7 years, whenever I do this, they read it, and sometimes there is something that they don't understand in terms of exactly what their duties might be or something of the sort. And then in terms of equating, I've got one son that likes a farm. I've got a farm that he'll get. I've got another daughter that likes the particular house. And I've got these various ways of equating that and percentages and all of that. And in the end, I think they feel very, very lucky in life.
So the average person who doesn't have your investment skills and they want to not lose their money, would you recommend that they play the stock market, they buy mutual funds? What do you recommend to the average investor?
Well, playing the stock market, playing is not a word I would choose. I would recommend that they put a similar sum, then maybe they'd be earning more as they went along, but save something every month and basically put it in an index fund.
Right.
They are not in a position to make judgments on stocks themselves. They're not in the game any more than I can prescribe in medicine or something of the sort. They will get a good result. The American economy has done wonderfully. I mean, if you take the 20th century, the Dow started at 66 and it ended at 11,400.
Right.
Now think of that. How could anybody get a bad result in investing starting at 66 and 11,400? But a lot of people do because they jump in at the wrong time or they think they know this stock versus that stock. But the average person should just consistently buy equities, which to me are by far the most attractive investment choice around, and put it in, and if they do that for 20 or 30 years, they'll do very well.
But you don't subscribe to the efficient market theory that says that basically you can't beat the stock market? You subscribe to that theory that you can't, or you?
Well, if I'd subscribe to that theory,
Right.
I'd still be delivering papers. Yeah.
Right.
No, I don't think there's any question that certain people who evaluate stocks as businesses can make intelligent decisions about businesses which will enable them to do very well in the securities market. But I don't think somebody that is listening, to a TV channel tell them what to do, or somebody jumping around with Astronics, or even some salesperson who's getting paid more money for selling them something and getting them to change tomorrow is the key to it.
Now, you gave away, or committed to give away, the bulk of your money to a foundation set up by other people. Why did you choose not to just have the money go to a foundation named after you that presumably you would control? And how did that idea come about?
Well, originally I'd actually planned. I thought my first wife would outlive me and that she would give away the money, so it would have gone to a foundation that she ran. But the idea was to get the money spent. And you say it's run by other people, but if you set up the Ford Foundation or you set up the Carnegie Foundation, they're being run by other people. It's just that the Carnegie didn't know who they would be, or Henry Ford didn't know who they'd be. So they are going to be run by other people if they extend beyond your lifetime. And I picked people that I had enormous confidence in the fact that they had a similar judgment about where money should go, and where I thought they would do a first-class job of administering it. And then, in the case of the Gates Foundation, I get people that are putting up their own money big time, who are very able people, who are working full-time at it themselves, who aren't charging me anything. And I've got these foundations that are run by my children that it's been wonderful for them, and they each have a separate foundation so that they can follow their own interests and not have to sort of roll logs as to who votes for this one or that one, and it's all worked out perfectly.
And what was Bill Gates' reaction when you called him and said, guess what, I'm giving you $50 billion eventually?
I think he said, what? No, I shouldn't joke about this. No, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think he was surprised.
Okay. And did he suggest you put your name on the foundation as well?
No, I don't want my name on anything. There are all kinds of people that do want their names on it. So if you can sell it to some other guy, why should you give it to me where you don't get anything out of it?
Okay, I understand. So, as you go forward now, are there certain things that you would like to accomplish beyond what you've accomplished? Are there certain social problems you'd like to see being solved, or economic problems, or is your goal mostly to keep your company doing well and give away the money?
Well, in terms of personally, sure. I want Berkshire. That is my painting in life. I've been painting it all my life virtually, and I want to keep painting it and have it become even more of what it already is. And so that's what I love. Anything that works positively for Berkshire in terms of adding better businesses, having wonderful managers around, anything makes them be in a position to get their full potential from their companies, I love. And I'll do that as long as I can. I like the idea that basically the fruits of that, will be used by some very intelligent people to improve the lot of a whole bunch of people who didn't get the lucky straw in life like I got.
And how old were you when you realized you were much better than other people in picking stocks and making these kind of investments? Did you realize that as a young person, or did it take much longer before you realized you were much better than everybody else?
It sounds obnoxious, but I thought I was going to be pretty good early on. I went through this period at Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, where I was really bad at Alice Deal, but I was kind of working out of it at Woodrow Wilson. And I had these teachers that I caused some trouble to, but they did think I knew a lot about stocks. And of course, in those days, teachers put all their money in AT&T. I mean, that was the ultimate safe investment. So when I was feeling particularly obnoxious, I shorted a little AT&T and brought the confirmation, showed them to the teachers, made them worry a little. But you couldn't love anything as much as I loved investments and not get fairly good at it. I read every book in the Omaha Public Library on investments by the time I was 11, and we moved back here. And as soon as I got back here and my dad was in Congress, I said, get everything in the Library of Congress, I want to read it.
Well, there's one company in Washington we didn't mention. You obviously bought Geico, and that's one of your most famous investments, but you made a very famous investment in the Washington Post many years ago. What attracted you to the Washington Post, and how long have you held that investment?
Well, I love the business as such, but when I bought the Washington Post company, this is pretty split. They had about 4.8 million shares outstanding, and the stock got down to 16. But thanks to the Nixon challenge to their TV stations and a few things, and Bibi Rebozo and the rest, the stock cascaded down from 37. So when we bought it, the whole valuation of the Washington Post company was about $100 million. Now, if you'd asked any reporter at the Washington Post to go out and do a story on what the Washington Post company's constituent businesses were worth, they would have come back and said $400 or $500 million. So you were really buying a wonderful business run by wonderful people at 20 cents or thereabouts on the dollar. And, it's almost a classic investment. If you'd asked any of the people who were selling their stock to us, what's the Washington Post company worth, they would have said 3 or 4 times what it's selling for. But they sold it because they thought it was going to go down the next day. And they were right for a while.
But you've owned that now for 30...
It's been 29 years. 39 years.
So you are an optimist about the future of our country?
It's a cinch. Yeah, we haven't lost the secret sauce. I mean, yeah, go back to that. When I was born in 1930, Dow was 252 on the day before. I was born on a Saturday. Friday was 252. That was the high for the year. It was going to go down to 42. There's no connection in this, folks. But if I'd seen that, my dad was going to lose his job, and he worked in a bank, and he had all his money in that bank, and it closed, and he had no money to pay his mortgage or anything. That was going to happen within a year. If you'd seen that, you said, go back. It'd be like the old Woody Allen movie, just don't even come out. And look at what has happened since that time. I mean, we went through a terrible war, we went through a terrible depression, we went through 25% unemployment, we went through thousands of banks closing, 6 for 1, We're not smarter than the people in 1930. We don't work harder than the people in 1930. We've just got a system that works. It's been working, since 1776, and it'll keep working.
So, any regrets in life?
Not really, no.
And today you are somebody who very close to the President of the United States. If he asked you to come in and serve as an advisor, would you do that? Or?
Well, it won't happen. If he wants to ask me anything, I'll certainly be. I'd always be glad to help. But that would be true of any president under any circumstances.
And today, Berkshire Hathaway, is that a buy at this price?
Well, the businesses it owns are worth more than the market price, but that's true of other businesses too.
Well, what I'd like to do is, on behalf of everybody here, thank you for an extraordinary tour de force of your explanations of things, and thank you very much for coming this evening. And I think everybody's had an enjoyable evening. I know I certainly did. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here and all America for what you've done, and for your philanthropy, and for your confidence in America. And on behalf of the Washington Economic Club and everybody here, I'll give you a few gifts if I could.
You may get on that short list eventually this way.
Okay. This is a Woodrow Wilson high school jacket we've had made up for you.
Go Tigers!
And we have here a copy of the original map of the District of Columbia we'd like to give to you as a gift from the club. And I'd like to give you as a personal gift a copy of the Declaration of Independence. When we talked about this appearance, You were at the archives, and I think you said you hadn't been there before.
It was marvelous.
Never been there, and I cornered you, and you said you weren't sure what you had agreed to, but you agreed that you would do this, and I thank you for honoring your commitment to come. And this says, it's inscribed to you, and it says, Warren Buffett, a rare modern man with the essential traits of our founding fathers, great wisdom, courage, and leadership, and also great wealth.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, appreciate it.
Thanks.
I want to just go back to 2008 for a moment and just even start with a very big picture sense of it all. What do you think happened that led to 2008?
Well, I think the main thing, but there's all kinds of tributaries feeding into the big Missouri River on this, but you had people think that housing could do nothing but go up, and you had a $20 trillion market in residential housing. So it was a big asset class, and people started using it as a currency, basically, and they found out that it wasn't straight up, in the end, and they borrowed on them, and there were levels of participation up and down the line. I mean, people at the top were writing mortgages that they knew they'd never have to hold, so they'd sell them to somebody in Norway after they'd been put in a package, and you had people refinancing, figuring that it didn't make any difference whether the monthly payments were too high, and you had them lying on loans, and you had the lenders participating in it, and you basically just had a huge speculation in housing, and 50 million of the 75 million owner-occupied homes in the United States were mortgaged. 25 million were free and clear, so they were okay. But you literally had a crash in the value of something that 50 million families owned on margin, had thought were going to go up. They'd based their living standards on it. In many cases, they'd borrowed against it. And it was unlike any widespread financial participation anybody had ever seen. So it manifested itself in all kinds of ways. I mean, everybody behaved badly, but they believed, and when people start believing something kind of crazy, you get that sort of thing.
It's early 2008. Hedge funds with a lot of subprime mortgages are going under. There were a couple. At that point, how worried were you? Do you remember being worried?
Well, I wasn't worried because I've always assumed that in a lifetime of participating in the American economy, it's going to move forward dramatically over time, and also it's going to have a lot of hiccups. And it's part of our economic system that we will periodically have some craziness go on, and so I don't try to predict markets, or I don't try to predict business. I just try to adapt to what comes along. I did see in the summer of 2008, I got a call from one of the top officials of one of the main Wall Street firms trying to sell us many billions of dollars worth of equity securities in Freddie Mac, and I knew something was wrong.
So take us back. I don't know if you remember this. This is after Bear Stearns goes down. So this is before Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah.
But after Bear Stearns, you get a call from Dick Fuld.
Right.
And he tells you that his stock is getting killed by short sellers.
Yeah.
And
when anybody says that to me, I get very suspicious. I'd love to have short sellers in Berkshire. How does a short seller hurt you?
And he says there's an opportunity for you to invest somewhere between $3 to $5 billion. Are you interested?
I'm interested in hearing him out. Yeah.
And what did you tell him?
I told him, tell me what your ideas are, and I'll do some looking at it. But tell me what you'll pay first, and then I'll know whether I want to do some looking. And So he threw out some tentative ideas. I do remember, and actually, he said, "Can I have Hank Paulson call you?" And so Hank called about, I think it was 6 or 7 on a Friday night, and then he stopped short of giving a totally unqualified endorsement, but he was probably hoping I was going to finance it, but he wasn't going to try and sell me too hard. I'm sure he didn't feel that was right. So anyway, I spent that evening going through there, probably a 10K. I've got it at the office still where I made notes as I went through it, and it was 250 or 300 pages, and I just wrote down on the front page the number of the pages where I was finding problems, and when I go through, I knew that it was not for us.
Because you saw what?
I just saw a lot of things that made me very worried about their financial condition and what would be happening to them under the circumstances that were happening in Wall Street.
Now we're in September of 2008. And this is Friday, September 12th. This is the weekend.
The weekend.
The weekend. And you get a call this time, not from Lehman Brothers, but from AIG, asking if you'd be interested in investing $10 billion in the company.
Yep. I said that, don't count on us. I know time is of the essence with you guys, so just don't waste it on me. So I'm out at that point. Now, they re-entered the picture a little later, but I said, I can't figure this thing out. It would have been $20-some billion, and we could have paid it if I'd known what we were getting. Well, the very fact that they were calling me and sending out stuff Friday evening at 8 or 9 o'clock in New York indicated they were in peril.
What does a call to Warren Buffett mean, you think?
Well, it means that they know we'll act fast if we like something. So we are the best fast buyer for anything that involves in the billions of just about anybody. And they knew I'm interested in the property casualty business in this particular case. And that they are desperate for something that's going to close within a few days.
A lot of people still look back at that weekend, and Lehman Brothers in particular, as the moment of the crisis, and wonder whether the U.S. government should have stepped in or not.
Yeah.
The next morning, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal both wrote op-eds, editorials praising.
Yeah, sure. That's the way everybody felt. The hell with those guys in Wall Street. We've had enough of them, basically. Long ago, some Fed chairman told me that whatever the Fed thinks it can do, it can do. Now, that may have changed some under Dodd-Frank, but that was the prevailing view of at least one Fed chairman.
So you think the Fed could have done it if they wanted to?
I think if I were chairman of the Fed and I saw what was going on in the United States then, I think I would have done it whether I could do it or not. I mean, are they going to come down? The Supreme Court going to send down some guy to arrest me as president of the Fed? I mean, I would feel it would be an act that I should do in the interest of the country if I were in that position.
So you think it was a mistake?
I don't know. I mean, because they'd have had to guarantee so much of public opinion. Can you imagine public opinion if all of a sudden, people are losing their houses and facing being underwater and all kinds of personal problems, and all of a sudden you've guaranteed that everybody at AIG is going to be okay and everybody at Lehman's going to be okay. I'm not sure it would have been. It would have been very tough to do.
How much political pressure at that time, do you remember, was on both Hank and the Fed and everybody when it came to bailout?
That was huge. That was huge. I mean, I think that Bernanke, I think that Hank Paulson, I think that Tim Geithner, I think they did it, and I think George W. Bush did the right thing. I think they were heroic, but you weren't going to sell that to the American people.
Lehman files for bankruptcy. Bank of America buys Merrill Lynch. AIG gets rescued. And yet there's still a serious anxiety that GE might go, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley.
Well, when Lehman goes, the big commercial paper holders were money market funds. I mean, these things were just hitting one after another, and both Hank and Bernanke had to worry very much about the congressional reaction to anything they did. Congress really didn't get it. George Bush got it. I give him great credit. I didn't vote for him, but I give him great credit for understanding just how big the problem was.
And you get a call later in the week about Goldman Sachs. Do you remember that call?
Well, I remember the call. Yeah. When Goldman Sachs needs money, you'll remember it.
And what did you think?
I did think that we were in very good hands. Congress was the one that scared me. I thought we were in good hands at the Fed. I thought we were in good hands at the Treasury. I thought we were in good hands at the presidency. And I thought that there was Goldman Sachs was sound under any situation except if markets just totally were closed up. I think the unsung hero of the whole thing, although it was a stupid thing to do, I think the unsung hero was Ken Lewis buying Merrill. I mean, Merrill would have been there on Monday morning. I think he got some fairness opinion that said it was okay to pay $30. I think he got it twice between Saturday at noon or something, and the deal getting announced on Sunday morning, nobody knew what Merrill was worth at that time. But he got the fairness opinion. He said, we'll pay whatever it was, $30 or thereabouts. It wouldn't have been worth 30 cents on Monday.
Big mistake then.
Well, it wasn't for the system. And incidentally, Merrill's worked out fine subsequently. But I mean, under the conditions that existed, on Monday morning, if Bank of America hadn't announced that purchase on Sunday, it wouldn't have just been Lehman. The second that Lehman would not have been, if they backed away from Lehman, they'd have to tell Merrill to stand on its own too, and bingo, bingo.
When you look back in retrospect, is there anything you wish that you had done that you didn't do? Any investments that you wish you could have made, given?
Well, I can look back on any week and come up with that. I mean, the situation, we'd have been better off, considerably better off at Berkshire if we waited 4 or 5 months to buy anything. I mean, the low was set in March, and it was much lower than that. I wrote that op-ed for the New York Times in late October. Well, it was right on a long-term basis, but it was way off for 3 or 4 months, 4 or 5 months at least.
Was there ever a moment that you thought that the system would gum up so much that that we would be back in sort of a Great Depression, that there really would be red lines people?
It could, if mishandled, it could have lasted quite a while. It wouldn't have lasted as long as them, but it would have really gummed things up. There's no question. They're already gummed up, but it would have. At some point, the government has to step in. I mean, when everybody in the world wants to deleverage, there's only one party that can leverage up. There's just one party, and if for some reason they don't do it, you've had it.
And when you look back now, is there a great lesson, you think, for the public, for new generations of people who are going to hopefully learn about and think about this crisis?
No, because the answer is people have always panicked. I mean, that's why they set up the Fed. We had all kinds of panics in this country in the 19th century. When people are afraid, they are afraid. Confidence comes back one at a time, but fear is instantaneous.
Thank you.
And it doesn't make any difference how sophisticated people are, whether they've got PhDs or anything else. When they are afraid, they are afraid. I know a number of people that would surprise you who during that panic period subsequently, went right to gold and felt that nothing would be worth anything. And, I mean, people really, fear is extraordinary with most people.
Do you draw any parallel or connection between the crisis 10 years ago now and the politics of today and the distrust of institutions and governments? And
sure. People have long memories, just like they did after 1929. It took a long time. I mean, people, when they've experienced extreme fear, it sears something into them where they want to know who did it to them, and they correctly don't blame themselves. I mean, they're not supposed to be finance experts or anything. All they did was buy a house and lie a little bit on their loan application. Just figured it was going to go up, and then they'd refinance and so on. I mean, who's going to blame anybody for that?
Is there anyone to blame for the crisis? Because that's been also a political...
You can blame a lot of people for doing very foolish things, but I don't think anybody was... there's a certain number of people who are doing crooked things all the time. And to some extent, they were attracted to the real estate market because the money was flowing so easily. I mean, when you can create a mortgage, in Bakersfield, California, and sell it to somebody in Norway, and then when you get these permutations of these things where you get one instrument that's dependent on another instrument. I made a calculation once on one security I saw that had been raided by the agencies, and I'd had to read 300,000 pages in order to understand both the primary security and then the ones that it was dependent on and so on. And it just gets, and nothing goes wrong for a while, so everybody gets used to doing it. It'll happen again.
Do you worry about another crisis?
Well, there'll be one sometime, but no, I don't worry about it in the least.
Because
I conduct myself so that if there's another crisis, I'll still be around. Berkshire will be in good shape.
What do you look around today and say, okay, I got to be anxious about that?
Well, asset appreciation draws in people that really don't know anything about the asset, and people start being interested in something because it's going up, not because they understand anything else, but the guy next door who they know is dumber than they are is getting rich, and they aren't, and their spouse is saying, can't you figure it out too? And I mean, it is so contagious. So that's a permanent part of the system. But in terms of the specific excesses, I don't see them now. No.
Are we better prepared for another crisis? Do you look at either the regulations or?
That's an interesting question because I've never read Dodd-Frank in its full 2,000 plus page. I've read little summaries. I have the impression, and I may be wrong on this, but I have the impression that it somewhat weakens the ability of the Fed to act promptly and unilaterally. And I would say that's a terrible mistake. And we need a powerful Fed. You may not like them, but they may do things that bother you. But you need somebody that if this country with now $100 trillion of household wealth, with now 75 million plus, that it doesn't come to a stop because everybody's trying to deleverage.
Was there ever a moment in that week where you, either between everybody calling you or talking to you, thought, wow, this is...
Well, I described it actually on CNBC as an economic Pearl Harbor. That's not a term I've ever used before. So, I mean, I felt it was something different than I'd ever seen. And I felt it was actually worse than 29 in a sense, in terms of the immediate panic that was induced. In 1929, if you remember, in September 29, the Dow hit a high of 381. Then it collapsed in the fall. But I was born August 30th, 1930, and it was back up to 250-something by that point. I mean, it didn't hit that many people. It hit everybody on Wall Street, but Wall Street wasn't as broad then remotely as it is now, with 401ks or whatever it may be. So this homes, that touches everybody.
Just to set the stage for viewers, last week Fed Chair Jay Powell said during his press conference that there's a lot of division within the committee about whether they want to cut rates again in December. He said it's not a foregone conclusion. In fact, quote, far from it. He said now that the Fed has cut 2 times in a row, there's a feeling that they're 150 basis points closer to neutral on the Fed funds rate. That's a level designed to neither spur nor slow economic growth. And that there is a growing chorus on the committee that says perhaps we should wait. Well, Friday, we got some of that chorus colored in. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack said that she would have preferred to have held rates steady last week. She has more concerns about inflation than the employment side of the dual mandate. She says she's hearing more about inflation concerns in her district and that they're closer, she believes, to her estimate of neutral. And so she seems to be in favor of holding rates in December as well. We also heard from Lori Logan of the Dallas Fed, who said that cutting interest rates was not what was called for given inflation. She doesn't think that the Fed needs to take preemptive action to cut rates again in December at this point. Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic said he was convinced to cut interest rates, but warned that the Fed needs to be very careful going forward about cutting rates further because inflation remains well above the Fed's 2% target. We also heard from Kansas City Fed President Jeff Schmidt, who we know dissented because he preferred to hold interest rates steady last week. And he was out with a statement essentially saying that he thinks that cutting rates further could ignite inflation. On the flip side, Fed Governor Chris Waller was in favor of cutting rates, voted to cut in favor of rates, I should say, last week, and said it poured cold water on Fed Chair Jay Powell's analogy of driving through the fog and needing to slow down. He believes that the Fed does have enough data here right now and that they should cut again in December. You had said before the policy meeting that you were somewhat uneasy about front-loading rate cuts based solely on slowing payroll growth, and that at the same time, inflation had been moving in the wrong direction, and just counting on inflation to be transitory made you uneasy. So why did you vote in favor of cutting rates last week? Was there anything that changed that caused you to want to take out more insurance?
Well, before the last meeting, not this November meeting, but in September, we issue the statement of economic projections, our dot plot projections of where the economy is going to be and where rates are going to be. And at that time, I thought there would be 2 rate cuts for the year. I'm balancing off 2 things. One, as you know, I believe that the place rates will ultimately settle is a fair bit below where we are today. And as long as we can get the dust out of the air, I still think that golden path is possible. And I'm trying to weigh that off with these concerns about front loading, especially when we have the data shut down. We're getting some information about the job market, and we have very little private sector information about inflation. So I think we want to be wary, but I'm still just trying to balance those off. Not much change since the September SEPs, and so I had no problem with that.
So, Austin, you're saying you're trying to sort of look through all this dust, waiting for it to settle. You had penciled in 2 rate cuts for this year, and Chair Powell had said after the policy meeting last week during his press conference that there's a feeling that you've cut twice and you're now 150 basis points closer to neutral than you were a year ago, and that there is a growing chorus on the committee that perhaps maybe you should wait. Are you one of the chorus?
I'm not supposed to say anything about what other folks say. In my mind, as you know, I am uneasy with front-loading rate cuts. I do believe rates will come down, but in a way, rates should come down with inflation. We've got to, if we're just going to count on the inflation that we've seen here, where the last 3 months core inflation is running 3.6% at an annualized rate, and core services, I think, are running close to 4% as annualized rate for the last 3 months. That's worrying because that's going the wrong way. If we're just counting on that to go away because it's transitory, that makes me uneasy. So I'm not decided for what I think about the next meeting, and we are still going to get at least some private sector observations and the Chicago Fed's labor market indicators telling us some about the job market. We're probably not going to get much on the inflation side, so I am a little wary, and my threshold for cutting is a little bit higher than it was in the last 2 meetings.
So to your point, Fed Chair Powell used the analogy of when it's foggy, you want to slow down, become a little bit more cautious. Is that a fair characterization for you? And how are you viewing the balance of risks? Fully recognizing that we haven't had official data on the labor market side because of the government shutdown. Sounds like you may be more worried about inflation than employment now when you look at the balance of risks.
I've been a little more worried about inflation than the job market if you think of it as a balance of risk, for the reason that other than payroll job growth, if you look at things like the unemployment rate or other rates that are less affected by population changes or immigration policy, those things have been pretty stable for some time. If you look over the last 12 months, the unemployment rate has not been going up. We haven't seen a big uptick in layoffs, which if this were the beginning of recession or deterioration of the labor market that was rapid, you would expect to see higher layoffs or firing, and we haven't seen that. There's still concerns on that side. And as you say, we're going to get some private sector data, so we can at least keep observing that. But I just want to emphasize, be very careful at moments of transition where you're trying to figure out whether the economy is turning, relying too heavily on 12-month backward-looking numbers like the 12-month trailing inflation. Each month we get a number, and 11 of the months we already knew. The new information is only for that new month. So the fact that the last 3 months inflation is not going down but is instead going up, including in some categories that are not driven by tariffs like services, those are areas of concern. And so that's a little bit, the last time you looked out the window, there was a mountain lion sitting in your front yard. So before you let Fluffy out to go run around, just let's at least get one more look.
All right, well, aside from Fluffy, I do want to come back to the job market because, yes, payroll growth did slow over the summer months, and since then you sort of have been in the dark as far as official data. But last week we saw some major layoff announcements from the likes of Amazon to UPS. If you did look at private sector data, ADP's measure turned negative for the month of September. We're going to get another measure this coming Wednesday. And the Beige Book revealed that employers are looking at cutting headcount either through attrition or layoffs due to policy uncertainty, weaker demand, and AI. Does that not worry you? Do you think that perhaps payroll growth has decelerated further since you have gotten official data?
It might have, and that's why, as I say, I'm not decided going into the next meeting. I want to see how things are playing out. I do think the public announcements of layoffs, you would expect, if that is an immediate business cycle-driven matter, that you would start to see an uptick in the official unemployment insurance statistics or the layoff statistics, or you would get WARN Act type data of that form that would give you a little bit of a heads up of what was coming in the job market. I do think the hiring rate is low. That's among the weakest things in the economy at the moment, and that's made it particularly tough for new graduates and young people. But a low hiring, low firing economy is unusual. That's the kind of economy that you expect when there's a lot of uncertainty. Normally, in the business cycle, you would have low hiring, high firing, or low firing, high hiring. When you get uncertainty, both of those go up as people kind of pull back and say they want to wait to see how things are going before they make decisions. This whole second part of what's going on in the job market, if it is being driven by AI, if it is concentrated in the tech sector, that doesn't feel as much like the business cycle to me and economic stabilization. That feels like more of a structural shift in what sectors are going to be employing people. So we'd have to think through what does that imply for monetary policy. That's a little different than if you were afraid that we were going into recession.
Yeah, so to your point, what is all of this telling you about the outlook for the economy in a cyclical sense, right? Not a structural sense, because that is what you have control over at the Federal Reserve. Perhaps are we at a turning point in the economy, given what we're seeing in private sector job market data, that GDP data is not yet reflecting?
Yeah, look, I always say one of the hardest things a central bank ever has to do is get the timing right on moments of transition. And that's especially difficult if you have squished bugs covering the windshield and you can't see whether you're still on the road. And when they shut down the data, the official data, That's the circumstance we're in. So I don't know that it's decided. I'm not decided going into the December meeting. I am nervous about the inflation side of the ledger, where you've seen inflation above the target for 4.5 years, and it's trending the wrong way. I believe on the other side, rates can come down a fair amount. It would probably be most judicious to have the rates come down with inflation. So let's get some observations that document that inflation is coming down and that the uptick we've seen is transitory. But we've got to weigh that off. If the job market starts to deteriorate in a more significant way, then that would change the balance of risk.
And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said yesterday that he believes that parts of our economy, particularly housing, may be in a recession already. Sounds like you may disagree with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's right that the housing construction sector's been weak. It has been weak now for some time. The three most interest rate sensitive parts of the economy usually that give you a sense of the business cycle are housing, consumer durables, and business investment. I think he's right to highlight housing's been weak. Consumer durables have been pretty resilient. And you saw, as you said, the GDP numbers coming in and consumer spending coming in pretty solid. And business investment has been kind of off the chain. Now, much of that driven by the AI boom, so that might not be cyclical. But the interest rate sensitive parts of the economy don't feel like they overwhelmingly point to that we're in a slowdown. I think that the economy has been pretty strong. The economy is pretty solid and has been. There's weakness in sectors, and anybody who's dependent on intermediate goods that the tariffs are applying to has been suffering. But other parts of the economy continue to grow, and overall consumer spending remains the main driver of solidity. Is that of the solidness of the economy has been largely based on consumer confidence.
Well, Austin, unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll have to leave the conversation there. Always so many more questions for you. So appreciate your time and insight this morning. Hope you'll come back and see us soon.
Yeah, anytime, Jennifer. Thank you for having me.
It's almost remarkable to me the extent to which there is still a pricing in that there will be a cut in December. Do you think it'll happen?
Yeah, I think it will happen. But listen, one thing I've learned about markets is you have to interpret what they are saying. There is a part of this committee that definitely would like to wait and evaluate the data. I think they can go. I think they should go. I think they can go quicker. But I respect the fact that inflation is running a little higher. I would argue, you're still, if you take 6 months core PCE, you're running at about 2.5%. Other metrics, you're running closer to 3%. My only view being that's not an infectious inflationary expectation dynamic that allows the Fed to move. In fact, in the market today, you can buy 5-year inflation break-evens at 2.5%. It's not like the market thinks inflation is a problem, such that I think the window is there. I have a stronger view that I think labor is a tricky thing from here, and I think there is significant displacement on labor that we're going to see over the next couple of years. Last week, being an embodiment of that when we heard from Amazon, UPS. Technology is changing the world. I was on a call with the CEO today, and we're talking about data center investment. When you go into data centers, you don't see a lot of people. You see a huge amount of CapEx. So it buoys the economy. You just don't see a lot of people in those facilities.
No, although you have to build them, right? You have to build them, you have to outfit them. That all requires people. But then when they're done, to your point, there's nobody there.
That's right. And by the way, it's not just AI that's creating this productivity. You talk about things around inventory management, logistics, client procurement, predictive maintenance. Productivity is exploding everywhere. It means you see it in all the corporate earnings. Companies are doing well. The revenues are decent. Cost of goods sold is coming down. Their SG&A is coming down. You can operate with a lower cost threshold. That's why you're seeing M&A that's so high. I got to get bigger. I got to vertically integrate. I got to use data. I've got to use AI. And I don't need as much fixed infrastructure, including people.
So this so-called low hiring, low firing environment that we keep talking about, has that already changed? Are we just not seeing it in the data yet, but we have the anecdotal evidence?
So, listen, there's no doubt that is the best characterization of where we are from a labor perspective today. My sense is companies are waiting, and you're seeing, I think today, I talked to CEOs who tell you, I'm comfortable with my labor force today. You saw Walmart freeze hiring. Let's stay where we are. Let's see if we can grow our business. And then you'll see some companies that proactively will reduce labor. I think, so if you take the last 4 months of data that we have gotten, and I don't think it's going to change much. The data we think is going to come is going to show the same thing. The last 4 months, if you strip out healthcare is not cyclical, it's not interest rate sensitive. We have negative job growth. I think that is something that is going to be persistent. Hopefully, the economy continues to be resilient, which I think it will. Actually, the economy's in good shape. I think the economy's in good shape. Companies are in great shape. I think labor, not so much.
Okay, so here's the question then. So say the Fed cuts because they're concerned about the labor market. What does that do for the labor market? How does it help the labor market?
So there's a few things. By the way, you brought up the most salient issue. So by the way, what is the interest rate effect today? In inflation, you think about what's sticky inflation? Healthcare, insurance, education, pretty hard to get interest rates to help healthcare, insurance, education. Shelter is actually one that you can help. You bring the rate down, you help inflation.
But shelter's not the one that's the problem as much right now. As Austin just pointed out, it's the services inflation right now that's accelerating a little bit.
Those are the ones that are, but those are really, right. But shelter is coming down. By the way, something you're starting to see is the mortgage rate has come down to around 6. All of a sudden, existing home sales are higher. You build more houses. You look at the earnings reports from the D.R. Hortons, the KB Homes, the Lennars. We're not building enough houses. Why? Because the home builders have to subsidize the mortgage rate. If you get that rate down, we'll get more housing. You'll bring down shelter. Listen, I think shelter is still the trickiest one. And what helps when you build more houses? Labor mobility. You lose your job in one state, I can move to another state. You create more velocity, and you can't AI building a house. Your point about data center.
Right.
If we can put a lot of people to work, there are so many reasons for doing it. Point being, listen, the interest rate tool today doesn't really affect CapEx because who's spending on CapEx? The big hyperscalers, et cetera. They fund through free cash flow.
And they also have a fiscal tailwind. I mean, not just AI, but in general,
Totally.
There's a fiscal tailwind for CapEx.
Totally. So it's not really, interest rate doesn't really affect CapEx like it used to in the 70s and 80s. Now, what is the interest rate affecting? Small business, 44% of the hiring in the United States. By the way, slowing, having a tough time. We need to help small business. Low income that borrows on their credit card, borrows student loan, borrows through other mechanisms. That is hurting. Housing is hurting. And by the way, the U.S. government, 90% of what we finance in treasuries is 2 years and in. You keep the interest rate 100 basis points above where it should be, and that costs the country $100 billion per annum. So point being, the interest rate tool is not like it was in years ago when it was the calibrator, it was the modulator of growth in the economy. It affects the people that are getting hurt today, and it doesn't really do much for CapEx.
And so you think they will cut in December as a result of all of this reasoning?
I do.
We talked about a year ago at our big Invest conference, and then I quoted you for months afterwards because at that. But what's so fascinating to me is how much the world has changed since then. Because at that time we were talking a lot about the deficit and how concerned some corners of the market were, but. If you remember, you said it's not the shark closest to the boat. It is not the most immediate threat. And in fact, that threat has seemed to recede even more between now and then. Do you think that is, what do you think is the shark closest to the boat? And do you think it's okay that we're not as worried about the deficits right now?
So, I think I said it then, and I'll say it today. I think the amount of debt we have in the country is still a tail risk, but I think it is only a tail risk. We have to keep refinancing. By the way, the fact that 90% of our debt, 89% exactly, is 2 years in, we got to keep rolling immense amounts of debt. That is still the tail risk today. I haven't gone through too many crises in my life, from the housing crisis to emerging market crises, European crisis, financial crisis. It all centers around where the vulnerabilities are, and that's the debt. Today it's at the U.S. government. Listen, I think there are a lot of things happening that allow us, as long as the economy grows, and this is part of my thesis around, we got to run the economy with 5% nominal GDP I think we'll hit it this year. I think there's a good chance we'll hit it next year. If you keep nominal GDP over the cost of the debt, meaning we get the cost of the debt down a bit, we keep nominal GDP, we'll actually de-lever the economy. So it is still the risk that's out there. Assuming the economy grows and we get the cost of the debt down, we'll be okay.
What is the biggest risk then?
So away from that, I'd say complacency. And when I see in markets, you start to see some things. There's a lot of money in the system. Part of why the equity market, I think, will keep going up. The technicals are extraordinary. People are willing to, to do things to generate return. That to me is out there. And then I don't see a lot. I feel good about the U.S. economy. The only problem with the economy is it's bifurcated. It's the most bifurcated economy I've ever seen. You got working a couple of cylinders on CapEx, a couple of cylinders, high income spending, low income not. So anyway, I think the economy's okay. Geopolitics hopefully is stable. U.S.-China relationship hopefully is stable. To me, it's just complacency and people putting money to work.
Well, and you said maybe going out the risk spectrum a little bit. You didn't say the word bubble, but I'll say the word bubble because it's been uttered by almost everybody lately. Is that... are we looking at that level of speculative behavior?
So I should. When I say no, the big companies today, the ROE these companies are throwing off. I actually went through the earnings that came out last week, and I was looking at the free cash flow that these companies are throwing off. It's like nothing I've ever seen. If you take free cash flow, just the companies, it was a Google, Meta, Microsoft, and you look at the amount of not just revenues, not just cash flow, free cash flow after you've spent on CapEx, they're creating major companies every quarter. And then the multiple, you look at they're trading at 20, 25, 26 times earnings. Now, I see a lot of deals, particularly in the private markets, that are no cash flow, no revenue for the next 2 or 3 years. And by the way, some are good business models. My guess is most of them will fall away, similar to what you saw in the actual bubble back in 2000 when you didn't have any cash flow. You certainly didn't have any revenues. So I do see some of that in the private markets, but generally in the public markets, I don't think it's overdone.
Are the private credit markets? Let's leave aside the sort of tricolor First Brands situations that we saw. Elsewhere, do you think there are problems in private credit?
From a systemic point of view, no. We do a load of financing in real estate, commercial, resi, bilateral credit, bilateral finance. Generally not. I will say things that get auctioned off. Like whenever there's a big financing that gets auctioned off, or if somebody wants to put their name on something that gets auctioned, like I look at the levels, sometimes it's through the public markets, and think, why would you ever do that? There is some stuff, and around the edges in like financing software, what's going to happen with software and AI, there's some stuff around the edges that I think are tricky, but not a systemic, like we saw in prior decades.
All right, Rick, I got to end with this. You are reportedly on the short list to be the next Federal Reserve Chair. I know you can't say very much about it, so I would ask it this way. Is that a job that somebody can say no to if they are offered it?
I'd say being on a list is an unbelievable honor for me, and everybody, will evaluate it based on, their own particular thought process. Listen, it's a huge honor, and I'm going to go through my process, and I will say today, the investing side of what we're doing is, you were kind enough. We did this ETF called BINC. The amount's up to $14 billion, and it's pretty incredible. There's some fun things to do in the investment arena. So, anyway, I know it's not a great answer, but that's.
You're enjoying what you're doing right now, is what you're saying.
I am.
Okay. Good to know, Rick. We'll keep talking, I'm sure.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Governor Myron, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It was great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
We've gotten a new reading this morning on private sector job growth, and we're seeing that job growth swung positive in October to 42,000 from negative 29,000. A lot of that job growth coming from larger companies as opposed to mid-sized and smaller companies. How are you looking at this report? And given that we don't have official government data, how is it informing your outlook for the labor market?
Sure. So, we always have to be cautious about reading too much into any one report, and that's going to be even more the case when we have a government shutdown, that we're not getting the data that we need to make monetary policy. Now, we are getting alternative data from a variety of sources, like the data that we got this morning from ADP, which is a welcome surprise that it came in a little bit better than expected. But in the context of the overall picture of the job market, it seems like the pre-existing trends that were in place before the government shutdown, the labor market, seem to be continuing, at a similar rate. You continue to see, modest potential overall job creation. You continue to see moderation in wages, and you continue to see indications that labor demand may not be as strong as we'd like it to be from a cyclical perspective. All of that, to me, is an indication that rates could be a little bit lower than where they are now.
How much of this that's driving the job market right now is structural versus cyclical? We know there have been major policy changes that have come from the administration, which take time to work through the economy. What's your sense of that? And do you have the tools, if it is structural, to deal with that?
Yeah, so a lot of the changes to the number of job creation, to the levels of job creation that would occur as a result of policy changes like immigration are what we as economists would call output gap neutral, right? Economically, the role of monetary policy is to balance supply and demand in the economy, and to make sure that you don't have demand so far outstripping supply that you get, upward spikes in inflation, or that demand isn't cratering relative to supply so that you get downward spikes of deflation of the type that you have in a depression-like environment. And so the goal of monetary policy is really to balance supply and demand. Now, if you have changes in, let's say, population growth because you either have a policy of large-scale mass immigration or you have a policy of closed borders and net zero migration, that's going to be what we would think of as typically, in my opinion, output gap neutral. And the reason that's the case is that when you have an additional person in the economy, they're generally consuming as well. They're working and they're consuming. And so from an output gap perspective, it's not clear that there's a very big role for monetary policy to play, because it's not the case that supply or demand are moving by very different amounts. They could be moving by very similar amounts. And so some of the low levels of growth are a result of changing border policy. If you have an economy in which you're throwing in large numbers of new migrants, of course, the overall job number will be flattered by that. And if you stop that, the overall job number will reflect stopping that. But that's not necessarily something that monetary policy responds to automatically.
And sort of building on that, the president has gotten many companies to invest billions of dollars in this country. We're going to be seeing investments in technology, in AI, in factories at the same time. The tax bill has been made law. We've got 100% expensing on PP&E and factories. How much job growth could we see from that? And what is the timeline on that? Is that a 2026 story? And again, kind of going back to those longer term structural versus cyclical trends, how are you viewing that as it relates to the labor market and setting policy?
Yeah, so look, I do believe that the supply side of the economy matters, right? I'm not, I don't exclusively look at either just the supply side or the demand side. I think that they both matter. And as I said a moment ago, the role of monetary policy is to balance them. And I think that there's a whole slate of expansionary policies on the supply side that drive out the productive capacity of the economy. You mentioned some of them, things like the full expensing provisions from the tax bill that was passed over the summer. There's now a huge tax incentive to invest in new factory equipment or to invest in factory structures. I do expect that to result in some additional investment demand. That additional investment demand pushes demand up higher in the short run, and a little bit longer run, it pushes the supply side of the economy out because you can produce more because you have more capital. And that's all stuff that matters when you think about the outlook and when you think about where monetary policy should be. But there's other elements that are pushing out the supply side too, and think about regulations. Regulations really shape the structure of the economy because they decide whether you can produce or not and what you can produce or not. So the industries that you have in the country, how big the industries are and where they're located, can all be a function of the regulatory environment. And as you change those, you can change the supply side of the economy too. And pushing out the supply side of the economy in those ways, and sometimes it'll take demand with it.